Hello. How was lunch? If you, listen, if you're just lingering after lunch, totally fine. That's great. But if you need to leave to get up to go to another session, we won't feel offended. We understand. Hello to everybody who is out there virtually. I know this is kind of an abrupt start, but it's time. I know that lunch went by really quickly. If anyone does have a question during this, because we are also being streamed virtually, feel free to come on up to the microphone so the folks that are out there, and all of you out there watching virtually, if you are, hello. I'm happy to have you joining us. This session is on sustainability during trying times, tending to your personal and professional garden. I'll introduce us in just a moment, but I'm curious who we've got in the room. Okay, how many social workers? Right on. Okay, chaplains. Administrators, CNAs, nurses. Oh yeah, look at that. All right, managers. Okay, bereavement coordinators, volunteer coordinators. Yeah, volunteers. Okay, well we got a nice smattering of an interdisciplinary team here, which is awesome. What a nice way to start. I don't know, we are from a hospice in the Seattle area, Evergreen Hospice, and you heard my colleague Kathy talk this morning, introducing things at the beginning. Dr. Katzenberger, Dr. K as I like to call her, she's a manager that's been there about a whole career at Evergreen. I've been there about 10.5 years, so I'm just a kid, new kid on the block still there. But we serve about 500 people a day in King and Snohomish County out in the field, and we have a 15-bed hospice care center for acute symptom management that that's been around for about, I think we just had our 30th year anniversary for that, which is pretty cool too. So I'm here today with my colleague Cryss, who is Cryss Blackwolf, who's a social worker. And we're going to talk, this is really kind of, this came about based on a series of conversations that we've had over the last 2.5 years with COVID, and what it takes to sustain, and different things we've kind of, practices that we have that have really helped us, and we've seen help some of our colleagues. And we hope that part of this will be interactive, and we're really interested in what you're thinking too. Cryss was a student at the University of Washington School of Social Work. We take second-year advanced practicum students every year. We take 2 students for 9 months. And even during COVID, we had students, which was kind of intense and hard to figure out as we were figuring it out. But Cryss was a student during that time, and now has been a full-time social worker with us, which is pretty cool. And so Wendy Lesbader is a professor at the University of Washington, and she's like, you know what, when I give a speech, I got to hold my notes. It makes me feel better, and I might not use them. Well, Cryss and I are going to hold our notes for today. You might see us looking down at that, but that just gives us a little security with this presentation because it's the first time we're giving it to a larger group. So thank you for your patience with that. As I said, I've been working in the field. I'm Lisa Stewart. I'm a social worker. I've been working in the field for about over 30 years. I've been in the adult mental health system, the disability system, the youth and family system. At-risk youth are still my jam. I do love that. And then I worked in cancer services, and then naturally progressed into hospice, where I've been for, as I said, about 10.5 years. Now I'll let Cryss introduce himself.
Hi. So I began my journey as a nursing assistant back in the day, and then since then I've been involved in a lot of different community-based programs. You know, we brought drum circles to the community. We helped aging communities develop community and make their own drums, those kinds of things. And then while I was doing this, I worked in high tech. for about 20 years before really deciding to go full-time into social work. And so that is kind of how I got my start, and I got through, I went to a UW, and then I graduated COVID class of 2020.
Yeah, COVID class. All right. Well, I mean, unfortunately, we're all in that COVID class together. We're still in it. I'm kind of marveling that I'm here without a mask, but you know what? We're getting our vaccinations. We're taking care of business. So it's so nice to see everyone's faces and be here in person together. All phenomena are subject to instantaneous transformation. Roger Ware. We're going to be talking today about this idea of cultivating your own garden, your sustainable garden, and that's an interior kind of garden, and it could be something in nature. It could be an exterior garden. For me, that exterior garden is art. That's what I have to do. That's how I balance the work that I do. If I don't do that, that's where I get into a nice flow outside of work, and it's one of the things that helps me sustain. So we're hoping to plant some seeds with you today and to, again, have an interactive conversation about really digging into this, your own personal gardens, whatever those are for you.
So I took this photo while exploring some ponds in Hawaii. What came to mind for me was Thich Nhat Hanh, who said, "No mud, no lotus." And I think it took a few years working in this environment to have a deeper appreciation for what that could truly mean. So on this one, what I also liked was the reflections on the water, and I was really taken aback by the beauty of what was being presented there, but also what was really going on behind the scenes, what was going on beneath. The muck has its purposes, and that's been a constant reminder for me with the challenges that this work sometimes brings, is that these things can be gifts, they can be teachers. In order to sustain in these trying times, we sometimes have to find bridges and avenues of transformation that are often revealed in a presentation like this, when we can actually get a nice flavor for what's going on under the surface. There's a lot of moving parts to this: art, community, conversation, and so that's kind of what our purpose really here is, to invite you into this conversation, to see how this might look for us, how this might look for you as well.
So some of the objectives today, we're hoping that by engaging in this workshop, you'll learn some strategies to cultivate compassionate, healing presence amidst these chaotic times. I know you're all doing it already, and I'm always trying to soak in as much as I can about that, because there's never enough information I can get about things I might want to try to sustain in this work, especially with how hard healthcare is right now. And I just want to acknowledge that all of you have been doing your jobs, which are really hard jobs already. You've been doing the second full-time job of dealing with COVID in your work for 2.5 years. You've been doing the third full-time job of dealing with it in your life. And if you've got anything else going on, my goodness, and you do, everyone does. So we're hoping that you can leave the session with some ideas and practices to ground yourselves while working through some primary and secondary trauma that you get from doing the work that we do. Naturally, we have pores. No matter how good we are at this, stuff is going to seep in, right? And our cup is going to get a little bit full. We want to be a container, but we don't want to continue to hold all that. We want to be a container that can kind of release things, and in a very boundaried way. And then we're hoping that you'll be able to gain some tools and insights that spark some curiosity and growth around resilient practice. And you might be sharing things with us as well. This
was one of my first watercolors. As I was entering into this work, I did not have the language to really describe some of these extremely profound and sacred experiences. We're invited into some of the most sacred spaces that you can think of. So I grew up having a fear of the canvas, fear of the brush, and so I decided to explore watercolor as a medium, and to see what language I could develop. Maybe I think my original intent was really to tell a story or paint a picture of the moment. We're going to talk about the moment a lot more. But what this, for me, it was really about being okay with that inner critic. It was, and so I think with the style of watercolor that I started to engage in urban sketching and whatnot, it was really not about perfection. It was really about just capturing the moment. So I carry a pocket brush with me to kind of remind me of that. It's been kind of a talisman for me.
He also carries a little tiny rubber chicken in his pocket to remember to have humor about things when it's hard. And he gifted me one too, and I'm glad to have it. And I will say, like, as a student, you know, those of us who are social workers know when you do your advanced practicum, that's 3 full days a week. 3 8-hour days, right? And then you're going to school, and sometimes you're working a job too. So when the students come, I don't want to make them do stuff that's hard. I don't want to go, hey, you're here. We got a big project we need you to work on. It's like, what do you want to do? And Chris's idea was to keep a journal and to start to do this art, which has been super cool to watch it progress. Anyway, that's pretty good for a beginning painting, wouldn't you say? I definitely would not be starting there. Okay, so John Muir, naturalist, thousands of tired, nerve-shaken, over-civilized people are beginning to find out that going to the mountains is going home. Wilderness is a necessity. And I just want to point out, I mean, we live in a beautiful state, and Oregon's a beautiful state too. And we have, we're very lucky to have access to some external wilderness, but we've got some internal wilderness too. And I mean, even though I've got a heck of a commute into the office, I used to be able to go over the 520 floating bridge, and I remember thinking every morning, like, wow, do you know there are only a handful of floating bridges in this country? Like, that is like a really, and then I'm looking at the sky and the water and the trees and thinking, I don't know how any of this happened, but here we are. Pretty amazing thing. So perspective can really help. In introduction, this lengthy introduction to what we're doing, we're really looking at finding meaning in our lives and in our work, and that requires cultivation, effort, and attention. And so it takes energy to show up the way that you all show up. You all showed up here today. Probably a lot of you had a long, hopefully pretty beautiful drive. But showing up in this work takes a lot of mindfulness, and especially during a time of such profound personal and community loss. And cultivating your personal garden is an inside job, right? That's, I don't know, those of you who maybe support other people in their work, you know that a lot of the things that are impediments or blocks to people is about an inside job that they might have to do, and we have to try to help them kind of get there. But it's their job to do. And so we invite you to walk in the garden with us and to explore a shift in perspective through the development of personal rituals that will help you sustain and which you can readily access during your days.
Another layer to that, when we're talking about inside job, I think about just the nature of seeds, how they have everything they need right inside of them, including the instructions for how to germinate and thrive. There was a quote that always stuck out for me by Clea Dannon: "Seeds are prayers and promises of what is to come." And so it became really a perfect analogy, I think, for the work that we do.
Yeah. So as we begin together to till this soil today, just a few quotes to kind of put us in the right mindset, or a mindset. I don't know what the right mindset is for anyone or anything. Perfectly imperfect, but as gardeners, we are also artists. The quality and focus of our attention sow the beauty of our heart into the soil of our garden. It is the quality of the heart that matters, and not how straight we can plant a row of corn. And that's Zekiah Murray. And then this is a Zen proverb: the only Zen you find at the top of the mountain is the Zen you bring with you. Today I am wise, so I'm changing myself. Rumi. And then Proust, a little Proust for us, but the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. Again, all we really have control over is our perspective and the narrative and story we tell ourselves about the situation. And that's really a powerful tool that we carry with us and work with ourselves and with other people.
Intimate encounters with impermanence. I'd like to invite you to think about what that means for you. This was really an accidental painting that spontaneously emerged for me after a really interesting visit. And there's a lot of layers to this too. This hangs on my wall to kind of remember, help me remember why I do this work. But you know, when I think about family and when I think about our support systems, I think about the reflections left behind. You know, this really kind of helped me kind of bridge some of my anxieties around these changing environments, you know, that I was experiencing with families, and really to arrive to a more strengths-based perspective around that.
What does intimate encounters with impermanence mean to you in this work, in this end-of-life work, in this palliative care work? Every day. Every day. Yeah. That's a pretty powerful thing to be encountering every day in your work. I mean, I think a lot of us have been doing this a long time, and you don't realize sometimes how weighty that is and how important that is. So I just really want to acknowledge that. And man, isn't that another beautiful painting by Cryss? I can't believe, can you believe he just started this a couple years ago? Because I cannot. Also, we did not plan our matching ensembles today. This is how we both showed up, so that's kind of fun too. So what do you think of this idea of hospice and palliative care workers as bees and pollinators? I really like this idea, right? This is a photograph by Cryss. He'll tell you a little bit more about it. It's from his real garden, his actual physical garden, but right now at this conference, this is what's happening. We are spreading ideas and thoughts, community, learning things from each other this entire time we're here. That's what we do as a collective, interdisciplinary group. Isn't that cool? I mean, who gets to work like that? And we're learning all the time from the community that we serve. I mean, it just never ends. It's ongoing, and we are some really wonderful pollinators. So.
And you know, one of the things that was striking to me when I was I bring my camera to the garden every day, just in case. But this made me really think about how sometimes, you know, we are working, you know, individually, but we're also in a collective. But the idea is that all of our efforts are really contributing to the whole. And so when we are working in tandem and in collaboration with our teams and our community partners, we're really accomplishing the goal of creating a sustainable practice. Like in here, they're actually pollinating these flowers so that we could have a bountiful harvest. And of course, plenty of stomachache afterwards because we got so many berries from this.
That was a nice turnout, you know, from the pollinators. Anybody a sci-fi fan? Anybody, I see a hand go, well, there's the Borg in Star Trek, and it's like one big collective, and everything that it takes in is part of that collective. Anyway, I kind of think of hospice in that way too, with its interdisciplinary work. And again, that relationship that I mentioned that we have with the University of Washington School of Social Work, that's pollinating too. And that is pollinating us. We are getting these wonderful social workers coming in, doing their training with us. They may stay, they may not, but we have been lucky enough to get 6 or 7 amazing social workers to come work with us and learn a ton. Cryss is one of them, learning from them all the time.
So is anyone here familiar with this tree? This is sometimes referred to as the floating tree, or also the Claylock tree of life. It's it's near Forks along the Olympic Peninsula. It's actually photos of this tree are in several different books and magazines and whatnot. But for me, this was really interesting to think about the tenacity that we bring into this work. We seem to do the impossible, you know, but it's certainly a collective work. And so I'm going to take a moment and just take a deep breath. My trusty brush.
From Cryss, the little baby paintbrush. You can do it with your finger.
So that is a representation of the ENSO circle. You see a representation of that. The idea around the ENSO is you're taking a snapshot in time, that particular moment, not concerned about perfection. You're really just concerned about being in the moment. And so these two symbols have been very powerful for me when I'm experiencing, whether it's a challenging situation or just setting the tone for the day. Typically it's drawn in one continuous brushstroke, and there's only one chance to perform it to its completion. And so that kind of goes against a lot of the things that we are socialized to feel about it.
Nurses. Nurses. Yeah, you could be as messy as you want with your little Enzo breath in the car, and it's perfect.
It's really about a reset, you know, and we can reset any time during the day, and that's why sometimes I carry things like rubber chickens, but also, you know, pocket brushes, just to have something tangible to remind myself, like, I'm okay.
Oh, and thank you, nurses, for also being so perfectionistic in your work. It's important work. You need to. Oh, I got to get on up in this thing. Okay, all right. I always feel like I'm projecting, but okay, okay. Thank you for letting me know. Anyway, your attention to detail is incredibly important, and it's part of your training. And I know sometimes it can be really hard to feel like you're not getting that as perfectly as you want. Us social workers too, we're pretty internally motivated and driven, but we're all perfectly imperfect, and you all show up for this work in a beautiful way, and you're doing you are walking creatively alongside people in the most raw and fragile times in their lives. And they have invited you, and I think sometimes, I can't believe that someone opens a car door to us, or a door at all. So I just want to thank you. Cryss and I both want to thank you for that.
And again, just a reminder that, you know, we can live unapologetically and show up just as we are, you know, with our training, with our backgrounds, certainly, and with the support around us, but we can all be perfectly imperfect.
Right on. Only way to be, really. We don't have a choice, so let's just embrace it together. So getting lost in the moss. So remember when I was talking about my art practice? I do collage. I've been doing it forever. It's like mostly images I like from the 50s, 60s, 70s. Who knows what it's going to come out of it. I put it on like an old found piece of art, a painting or something like that. When I'm doing that, I am getting lost in the moss. I am in the flow. I recently lost my best favorite little creature in the world, which is like losing a kid to me, right? And the only thing that has kind of taken my mind off of that is to do some artwork. You know what I mean? Just to give myself a break from the grief that we all have when we have loss. It's a universal grief. I know animal lovers, you'll understand, and as humans we see that all the time with the people that we care for too. So
this is a Roshi frog. He's been with me for about 6 years now. When I acquired him, or when he came into my life, I was playing with the ideas about you know, the work that we do, and how sometimes what we may not see necessarily the results right away, if at all. And so this is a process of just letting the moss, letting the environment kind of take over and create whatever is going to be created in its strongest strength there. And so when I was gathering my gardens, oh, thank you, I created a little miniature forest. I also have a greenhouse where I've done that. But what I like about moss is that it causes me to really get close. You know, I use a magnifying glass, I'm using tweezers, and I think that has also been a solidifying factor in just being presently in the moment, you know, instead of doing like wide brushstrokes, if you will. So moss has been an important teacher for me.
What's your lost in the moss or your flow? Where do you kind of lose yourself? Knitting, right on. That's a really good one. There's an article in the New York Times about like this young group of people that are really into knitting now.
Playing Native American flute.
Ooh, wonderful. Playing Native American flute for our folks virtually. Isn't that cool? That is beautiful. Anybody else?
Coloring.
Coloring.
For those of us with no artistic
Listen, this work is an art. This work is an art. So you do, but coloring is fantastic and very kind of playful and whimsical, right? Kind of gives us a release. Anyone else? This drive here, this 4-hour drive over the pass on 2, whoo, that's like getting in the flow. I would take that drive over my hour commute any day. So nature can be something like that for us too. Into the weeds. You ever get there in your work and life? Yeah. So how can we not? We live in a hectic culture. We work in healthcare. Healthcare does not get easier. It gets harder. And again, you're all still showing up. You're here because you care about sustaining and you care about this work and you care about the community that you serve, which is amazing and beautiful. So Cryss and I were having a conversation one day and he said, oh, I see the weeds as allies. So he's going to tell you a little bit about that.
So what's interesting about weeds I've come to learn about is that they have some incredible purpose in the garden. They can tell us what the state of the soil is. They can tell us what amendments might be needed. So for instance, our blueberries were not doing very well. I let the weeds kind of grow there, and then they kind of told me what the soil needed to have in there so that the following year we could have a pretty big harvest. Thank you, Mike's. So for me, it also gave me kind of permission to not be so polished with my garden. You know, my garden is kind of wild around the edges, but I've had some of the most amazing discoveries by just letting it do what it needs to do. The weeds have attracted some incredible pollinators, so I'm able to get nice pictures of bees or whatever because of the weeds. And really, you know, if I didn't know that was a weed, I would say that's a really beautiful flower right there. But they also have nutrients too. I mean, there's a lot of weeds that we can eat.
How does it show up in your work?
How does this show up in my work? Well, you know, I had one patient that we work with who had not the best history with male caregivers, and you know, I felt kind of like a weed, and I started to, it's like, how is this affecting how I show up? And so I used this. Thank you. I used I came back to the weeds. I'm like, you know, these we call them weeds, right? And it's like almost a derogatory statement, but they have names and they have functions. And so when I started to have those possibilities instead of the problems, I felt that I was able to show up in a more profound way for this person, and we actually developed a really good therapeutic.
It's almost like alchemy, right?
Yeah.
It's this idea of something that can seem like it's a nuisance or needs to be pulled might be actually something that is there for growth and learning and support, and it's just an interesting perspective to have. I usually think about the fact that we have to make friends with those things that we think are really hard or that we think are in our way in our work and in our life. Not always easy to do. I'm not always the best at it, but we can make friends with the weeds and figure out how useful they can be to us too in this work. And there's a lot that you are facing every day in this work that can feel like it's something you have to get around, move out of the way to do the work, but you can't. It's part of what you're going to have to face, right? So just some thoughts about that. Does that resonate for anybody? You're doing great for after lunch. I just want you to know that. And I appreciate, there is very nice interaction. People at home, this is a very attentive group who is making Cryss, they're making Cryss and I feel really good, even though they're really nice and mellow, which is super cool too. Okay, Cryss is going to take us through a little something that he calls the lemon exercise.
Sensory memory and things like that have just been a powerful tool for me. When I'm thinking about my gardens that I go to, you know, we can go to them in our memories, our fantasies, our dreams. We can particularly go there if we've had that experience. So I was attending a lecture in high school, and the instructor did this really weird thing that I thought at the time. You know, he said, okay, everyone with me, we're going to pretend like we're cutting a lemon. And we went through that process, and then he grabbed it and he's like, you know, you squeeze it into your mouth. And then everyone, I think just about everyone in the class started to twitch their eye a little bit, because we all kind of know what that experience is like. And so I was thinking about how could this be useful for me, showing up in the work that we do. And so I was using this paradigm for myself to, you know, go back to like my happy place, you know, whether it's my barefoot in my garden with the grass around my toes, or the moss, or a favorite beach.
These touchstones for us, you know, sometimes it might be that little rubber chicken in his pocket that I mentioned, but it might be a smooth stone that just is your grounding thing. It might be a scent. It might be a sensory memory. And it's just a really good reminder that you can carry that sometimes other people can relate to that, but you can also carry that for yourself with you, and it can kind of ground you in the situations that you're in. And it's really, would really invite you to think about what those things are for you, and try to keep yourself surrounded, keep something within reach mentally or physically for you throughout the day to bring you to that spot. Because it can really help reset things.
I say there's a lot of research around the use of smells and things like that to trigger memories. This has been an interesting exploration with some of the folks that we support too, to help them have access some of these spaces of joy. I'm going to wrestle with this mic.
They're in it. They're in it together, but they're working it out.
Anyway,
well, this is my contribution to the lemon exercise. Does anybody know what band this is? Who's a good guess? Led Zeppelin. My favorite band, my ride or die band, and Lemon Song is on Led Zeppelin 2. And I listen to Led Zeppelin 1 almost every day on my way to work. I've been listening to it since I was in high school, junior high maybe. It's just one of my go-tos. But anyway, that's a nice sensory memory for me. It does something. It gets me in the right headspace. I mean, I am listening. My doctor did tell me, no more political podcasts for you. No, like, that's enough. You need to listen to something funny or, you know, music again. And I did used to work at a record store, so I do like music. All right. So, our personal gardens.
This was one of my earliest gardens. So, I was, when COVID first kind of came around, I was trying to think of something that I could do inside. And someone suggested to me air plants. I had no idea how to care for an air plant. I killed off several of them before I realized that air plants, contrary to popular myth, do need water. And
they need a little spritz.
They do. Pro tip here, you soak them for about 30 minutes once a week. So, but what was interesting for me was that it kind of gave me, I wouldn't say permission, it gave me a platform to just be as creative as I wanted to or needed to. So I was able to change it up every week, you know, to represent either people that I've interacted with or things that I've been thinking about. And I got to learn about air plants. They bloom only once a year. I'm sorry, once in a lifetime. And so there were a lot of
even more profound than once a year.
Yes. And so, and they require the darkness to be able to synthesize, to be able to soak in the moisture. There's some really interesting things going on, textures and scales on the outside, but it requires that darkness. And so I was, again, thinking about all the, whether we're talking about weeds or whatever we're talking about in a negative connotation, really the art of reframing has become really powerful for me. And this was one of my earliest examples of that.
And isn't that a cool air plant garden? I mean, I kind of want to emulate that. Not kind of, I really do. I like it. But I hope that you're starting to think about what your external and internal garden might be. And it doesn't have to be plant filled, but it might be. Because again, that's something that you get to carry with you and kind of tap into. That moment when you think you don't have time to turn on the music while you do your notes or just like stop for 5 minutes, that is exactly the time that you need to do that, and that you need to kind of tap into these things for yourselves. So that really kind of goes into this idea of physical and mental walks. Again, John Muir, in every walk with nature, one receives far more than he seeks. He, she, they seek. And I like to be able to take a mental walk. I used to work in the adult mental health system, and we contracted with the county. I ran all the short-term care beds and adult family homes for the county in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was like at a big meeting, head of the county at the other end of the table. I'm at this far end, a lot of people, and I just took a little vacation in my head. I just took a little mental walk, and when I came back, I was being asked a very direct question by the head of the county, and I just had to say to everyone, I'm sorry, I just took a little mental vacation there for a moment. Can you repeat that for me? And I think sometimes we just have to do that. And so I really want to invite you again to think about both physical walks, if you're able to, if you get the opportunity to do that, just to release things and be outside and breathing the air, even though it's a little smoky right now. But the mental walks are really important too.
Sometimes having a little internal hold music too works.
Yeah,
works.
yeah, that would be good. Let's talk about creature teachers. So I just told you my best little creature moved on to whatever astral plane. But I can tell you that animals have been huge in my life. I've had animals my entire life that I have been lucky enough to have live with me. If I had it my way, if I didn't work all the time, I would have a horse, a talking bird, a rabbit, a couple dogs, a couple cats, probably some more stuff. I wouldn't mind a llama. We do have a doctor that has takes in animals and has a buffalo, which is pretty cool. But I can't tell you how much during the pandemic that also helped, especially with some of the isolation that we may have felt. There's no, it's not hard to understand why so many people got pets during this time. They are giving so much back to us, right? We also shout out to our volunteer program. We do animal assisted therapy at our hospice too, and those animals just give so much to all of us and to the patients and families. So Cryss is going to tell you a little bit about this picture.
Has anyone here seen that documentary? Was it My Octopus Teacher? Yeah. So it's not as cuddly as some of our four-legged friends. So as someone who has lived with chronic anxiety, one of them was around breathing. And so one of the things that I did, my wife did with me, was we learned to scuba dive. And so we, since then, we've scuba dived all around the world. Dived with sharks, dived with manta rays, you name it. This was in our own backyard. So in the, let's see here.
Hood Canal.
Hood Canal, but there's a place there, colloquially known as Octopus Gardens. And so this is about a 15-foot giant Pacific octopus. She has a couple of friends and dens next to her that are not seen here, some 8 to 12-foot wolf eels, they look like giant Muppets. But my point in bringing all of this is that our gardens are really only limited to our own imagination. You know, there's there's a lot going on that we often will overlook. I mean, we may not all have access to scuba diving, right? But just knowing that it's there. So this really was, the idea around this was just that our gardens can be unconventional. That for me, that air plant garden was unconventional. And our gardens could be metaphorical as well. So just to give you some food to think about.
All right, right on. Cryss mentioned reframing. So naming and reframing, perspective and happy accidents, right? Again, our perspective is the only thing we truly have any control over. Our story, our narrative, the story we make up about whatever's going on is what we have, how we choose to be in whatever situation we're in, and how we, in our role, translate information to people in a way that they can receive it, that they can hear it, that they can make choices and understand, make their own choices in this person-centered care and their plan of care. So just a really important idea about how we can look at a situation and decide how we want to see it. And I try to think of us as having this huge lens in this work that's as multifaceted as possible so that we can try to see and understand different situations and experiences. And also, you know, somebody once said to me, what do you get from being overwhelmed? And I thought, what do you mean, what do I get? What kind of question is that? Was in my head. I didn't say that out loud. But then I thought, oh, that is an excellent question. We all have moments of overwhelm. And I thought to myself, do I get something from that? I want to reframe that. I don't want to be overwhelmed. But do I get, well, yeah, I get to abdicate responsibility for something because I'm too overwhelmed to do it. Well, that's not what I want. So it was such a good way for me to think about how to reframe that feeling or that experience when it comes up. And every time it does, I think of that, and it's very helpful to me.
One thing I like to do is just yell, plot twist. You know, and just kind of to gently enter into that naming and reframing. Just a short backstory. When I was working for Microsoft, I was not really feeding my soul in doing that. I mean, paycheck was good, but it wasn't really giving me what I needed. And so I wrote Patch Adams a letter, and so I wasn't surprised, but he wrote me back, and he kind of reframed this. I was telling him, I have this daunting thing ahead of me. It's going to take me about 6 years, to get through the schooling I need to, because it's been so long since I've been in school. And he wrote me back and said, just think about it as a slippery slope of delight. Throw your hands up and just woo, whatever you need to do. That's one of the reasons why I also carry rubber chicken, is kind of an homage to Patch. And I also wear some funny shoes out in the field sometimes. I don't wear those today, though.
Hey, can we just do this for a second together? Let's just take this ride. This is a big, beautiful ride in this world, right? And doing this work, right on, right on. What a good feeling, huh? When we're in our car, maybe a stoplight. Let's just do that for a second. Everybody is going to be like, what the heck is going on in that car? But you know what? At least you're not like, with another driver. So it's a good thing to do. It
also causes us to breathe, because we have to breathe when we're doing that.
Yes, yes. And happy accidents. I mean, our own Bob Ross, right? And I'll recommend that documentary if you haven't seen it. It's really interesting. But what a happy little painting fella, bringing a lot of joy.
Okay.
So Cryss is going to talk with us about haikus and a haiku exercise that we're going to do together.
So again, in my pursuit to really cause myself to be present, I use the Enso circle and whatnot, but what I'll do is I've been experimenting with haiku. So it's for anyone who may not be familiar with it, it's a Japanese poetry form that uses few words to really capture a moment. Much like with the Enso circle, we're really just concerned with the moment. And so the haiku is really to kind of create a picture in the reader's mind, like a tiny window into a scene. So traditionally it's written in 3 lines. There are certainly many variations with that, but there are a few common characteristics we see in haiku. There's a focus on nature. There's also a season word, such as snow, that would tell the reader what time of year it is. There's also one of the stanzas is designed to be a division that occurs somewhere in that poem that will focus on the one thing another, and then it'll kind of bring it into the center. So, for instance, instead of saying how a scene makes you feel, you might show details that caused you the emotion. And so when we are thinking about, the many different forms of mindful practice, I've really come to appreciate haiku, if for anything else, that it causes us to be intentional and in the moment.
So here's a simple haiku for us. The canola flowers, the moon in the east, the sun in the west. Yosa Busan, 1716, 1784.
Perfectly broken, collected and healed with love, a golden harvest. This was a painting that I did in my earlier days as a student, and I decided that I needed to also explore poetry with that to give a much fuller dimension. But this was really around the idea of us being perfectly broken. I think about the Japanese art of golden repair. Does anyone have familiarity with that? The idea is really, rather than to discard a vessel, we really cherish, the properties, the inherent value of that really is in just its very existence in whatever forms it is. So we'd use precious metals to kind of bring that together, and it becomes, these fractured pieces are really seen as treasured portions of this whole. And I thought there was a lot of wonderful applications in the work that we do, and with those we serve with this.
And we wondered if you might want to try, just take a couple minutes, take a stab at writing a little haiku. We'll just take a couple minutes, and then I'll check back in to see if anybody wants to read that. And while you're doing that, I'll just throw out a line from a song that I think relates, which is The Cracker Where the Light Gets In. Anybody know? Leonard Cohen. Leonard Cohen. You got it. Okay, so let's just take a couple minutes. Anybody bold enough to try a haiku? Cryss is working on one. This is a quick little thing, perfectly imperfect. He just gave you a little context, but you do whatever you want with that. Enzo breath.
Does anyone have anything they would be willing to share?
Bueller.
Bueller.
Anyone? Bueller.
I can share what I wrote. Ancestral songs flow. Autumn winds carry the seed. The hearth fire kindled. And my choice in those words, I think about the ancestral songs flow. These are the stories that we receive. Autumn winds carry the seed really speaks to the changing of the seasons, the transition, and the hearth fire kindled. It also, I think, for me, it paints a picture of, well, the fires around us, but also just the fire that burns in our heart that keeps us sustained in this work.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for trying that, and hopefully that's a little something that you can have in your pocket if you want to do that. Cryss has a little something he's going to read.
Like time and flesh, all things borrowed and then returned. Yet our most authentic endowments survive in the seeds of the most precious offerings. The greatest of these, the gifts of grace and space extended to another.
By yours truly. This yours truly. And another picture of his external garden. Desmond Tutu, do your little bit of good where you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world. And don't think for 1 second that you're not doing little bits of good every day, because you absolutely are.
Yeah. Rumi said that a candle loses none of its light by lighting another. And that's kind of what that makes me think about. It's really our wish for you that your candle will burn long and bright in this great work. And we have the tools and the support around us to really do that well. I think it requires a lot of intentionality, a lot of practices that we put into place, such as these things like drawing the Enso circle, getting good at yelling plot twist in the middle of the day. Yeah.
Cryss is going to read you the Bodhisattva prayer for humanity.
May I be a guard for those who need protection, a guide for those on the path, a boat, a raft, a bridge for those who wish to cross the flood. May I be a lamp in the darkness, a resting place for the weary, a healing medicine for all who are sick, a vase of plenty, tree of miracles, and for the bounteous multitudes of living beings. May I bring sustenance and awakening, enduring like the earth and sky, until all beings are freed from sorrow and are awakened.
So, we talked about planting seeds. So this is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway, sometimes called the Doomsday Seed Vault, because seeds are the absolute essential tool to keep humanity alive in case of catastrophe. So we know how we're planting seeds, and seeds are these perfect little things that have everything they need to grow. And isn't that beautiful, and isn't that wild that that exists, that this is what we need to have sustained? Albert Einstein said, I don't know what the Second World War will be fought with. Let's hope, or I'm sorry, the Third World War will be fought with, but I know that after that it will be fought with sticks and stones. So, perspective, I know these are some trying times, there's a lot going on, and it's pretty cool that this is out here, this seed vault, and we really hope for as much smooth sailing as possible for all of you. But even if you go aground, sometimes that's okay. That's okay. You can get out and walk or traverse the land, or maybe get back into the water. You may have noticed that Cryss and I took off our lanyards when we started, and now we're going to put them back on, because this is another little ritual that in a social work meeting we were discussing. First, you can see the beautiful lanyard that Cryss made himself that has a lot of meaning, which he'll tell you about. But then also this idea, do you ever realize how heavy this feels around our neck sometimes when we're wearing these during the day? And it can be a really great reset just to take this off for a few minutes and give yourself just that space, or take it off at the end of the day when you get in your car. It isn't that it isn't important or meaningful, but there's just something about the ritual of that, and we'd really invite you to think about what rituals you want to put in your day-to-day life. Rituals free the mind and can also really release stress for you.
This is heavy for different reasons.
Yeah,
a lot of stuff. But when we're able to empty our cup, we're really, I think, put ourselves in a position that we're able to receive new and profound insight in the work that we do. So these little rituals, I think, kind of make room for that. I think when it comes down to it, I really think about Shenru Suzuki, who said in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are a few. And I think that's a good reminder for me to empty my cup, on a continual basis around that. So we really invite you to mind your garden, to tend it, go there often. attendant so there are fewer burrs, so that when you take off your shoes and you're able to feel the earth beneath you, you can really be a healing experience. Again, going back to possibilities versus problems. So.
And we're so grateful to have spent time together with you today, and that you gave us your time and energy and care and thought and attention. How wonderful is that, and how thoughtful of all of you. Do you have any questions or thoughts? Yes, Alicia.
What are some other rituals that you use in your work that help you? Because you said that rituals ease the mind.
Yeah. So the question is, what other rituals do we use in our work that can kind of free the mind or ease us? One for me is, I have to remember I mentioned like a grounding stone or something, like one of those skipping stones. I really like to have one of those like handy or in my pocket and just kind of touch it if I'm like, boy, you just need to get grounded for a second. Another one is that I might be sitting in my chair and I just might say, your feet are on the floor, your hands are on these. You just got to call somebody's really upset. There's something you've got to fix. And I also have old school tape deck. It lives right here in my head. And you know how the old school tape deck had 2 lines and that's pause? I really want to be responsive and not reactive to things. And so I push that pause button.
For me, one of my daily go-tos before each encounter, as I go through my senses, what am I feeling? What am I tasting? Sometimes it's even a taste on the wind. What am I hearing? Is the chair I'm sitting on, is it hard? Is it cold? Is it warm? Just that I think that's that in the moment check in with ourselves, is really what's important, because then, we are able to I think be a lot more fully present when we're aware of what's going on inside. But we're also able to look at it unapologetically, would not assign or attribute, any meaning to like the cold or the hard seat. Just it is as it is. And so for me, that's one of my rituals.
Thank you all so much for being with us today and for being here and for doing this amazing work.
Thank you.
All right, I think it's time. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll just wait for a couple of you to get your seats. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Cheryl Medawattage. I'm one of the board members with WSHPCO. I'm so delighted to have Bill Lonneman here. He's going to be talking about death and dignity in the state of Washington. Bill has been a nurse since 1983 and had his first 5 years as a nurse at the Hospice of Cincinnati. He has been teaching nursing for the past 15 years. His teaching has been recognized by his peers and students as highly engaging and notable for the passion he has for the material. This is not going to be a lecture, but more of a seminar with frequent interaction. Our goal is to continue the conversation on this important topic, to invite the audience members to reflect on how this impacts their own lives and practices, and perhaps to help us all arrive at some direction on how to better support one another as we continue to face death with dignity with our patients and families. Bill?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Very honored to be here with you today to talk about this, and grateful for the board for inviting me to be here. I know this topic of the Death with Dignity Act may not be one of the usual ones for us here in this assembly. Yeah, it is there. 90% of the folks that choose Death with Dignity in the state are enrolled in hospice care. at the time of their death. If you want a snapshot of this, the Department of Health every year issues a report that's drawn from the reports after death. And I encourage you to take a look at it. It's a very brief document, but it tells a lot. I wanted to just put this in the context of my own experience. I've been a nurse for almost 40 years now. My first 5 were in hospice in the early to mid 1980s. I still remember taking care of my first AIDS patient in the 80s. This is my crew at Hospice of Cincinnati, which was a pretty early hospice, I think. They hired me straight out of nursing school because they thought I was 26 years old, so they thought I was mature enough to handle being a hospice nurse. So it was my first job. So it holds a special place in my heart and my experience as a nurse. I've been influenced by Catholic social teaching, although I'm not a practicing Catholic at this point. If you're familiar with Catholic social teaching, it's very strong in terms of the dignity of the person and justice. I also have a strong interest in ethics and in solidarity with patients and with nurses. So I did this study really because I was concerned about how we were doing as nurses. And the allied health professionals, the other folks in the room, I share that concern with you as well. So I'm concerned about the patients, but I'm more, in some ways, maybe more concerned in just what the effect is on us taking part in this. I've had time as a nurse practitioner. I was 11 years a family nurse practitioner, and I've been teaching for about 15, 16 years now. So I just want to put this again in context. Washington's Death with Dignity Act, as you know, was passed in 2008 by voter initiative and then became law in 2009. I arrived in Washington from Ohio in 2017. And the next year, Washington State Nursing Association asked the Nursing Care Quality Assurance Commission, NQAC, to clarify the role of nurses in death with dignity. So the commission held 2 public hearings to help inform their advisory opinion. And I attended both of those meetings online. It was just on the telephone kind of thing. And I must say, if you ever hear about the Nursing Commission asking for input, there were like 5 of us on the call. It was kind of unbelievable to me that there were like 3 or 4 nurses out of the whole state of Washington on this call to talk about death with dignity and give input to the Nursing Commission. I also had conversations after that with lots of people, End of Life Washington, Whatcom Hospice, the Palliative Care Institute at Western, and ethicists and researchers here and in Oregon. The Nursing Commission actually decided to hold up on their advisory opinion because at the same time, the American Nurses Association was actively looking at revisiting its position on nurses' participation in death with dignity. So the ANA issued their statement in September of 2019, and the next month, the State Nursing Commission here issued their advisory opinion. So they actually held up their opinion until the ANA said something. The ANA's statement regarding nurses' position on aid in dying, they called it, is that nurses needed to perform all normal nursing care of the patient, including providing information, managing symptoms, coaching the family, and remaining engaged, non-judgmental, and attentive to the evolving needs of the family. This was a big departure for the American Nurses Association from their previous position. So just 6 years earlier, they had forbidden nurses to participate in any way in aid in dying. This revised statement in 2019, then they based off their Code of Ethics and Scope and Standards from 2015. The new statement said, nurses are not actively participating in aid in dying when they provide information, support discussion, or are present with a patient. So they were very clear about that, and it was a departure. So the Nursing Commission's advisory opinion, which is really very good, and I encourage you to take a look at it. This is one quote from it. Lack of recognition of the direct and intimate role of nurses in the care of patients at the end of life leaves nurses in a potential moral quandary regarding their responsibilities to patients. So it's a very sensitive statement in that it recognizes that we're put into a difficult position by this choice that the patient is making. The Commission recognized that nurses are subject to multiple influences, including the legal framework, institutional policies, professional standards, and then personal beliefs and values. So they really recognize there's lots of forces at work. They went on to address two issues: employer restrictions and conscientious objection. Under employer restrictions, they said, yeah, it's okay if healthcare institutions create policies consistent with their philosophy and mission. These fundamental values, however, may conflict with the patient's right to access legal end-of-life options and nurses' obligations to exercise their full scope of practice. They were particularly concerned about institutions saying that nurses couldn't talk to their patients if they received a question about end-of-life and death with dignity, that institutions could basically gag the nurses in terms of saying anything. The Commission encouraged nurses to engage their institutions in discussion. Each nurse needs to decide if their own personal and professional values are sufficiently aligned with the institution to allow them to practice without undue moral distress, the tension between what we believe and what the institution's saying. So they talked about two areas in particular. Many hospices and institutions prohibit their employees from being present during the time of ingestion of the medicine for death with dignity. Most of you know this probably, and again, your policies at your hospices may reflect this or may not. The Commission actually raised the concern about patient abandonment, that if people walked away at a critical time, that was questionable in terms of abandonment. And then they also dealt with kind of the opposite thing, nurses coming in off duty to be a friend to the patient and be there when they ingested the medication. And they said that risked crossing professional boundaries, which is pretty clear. In some ways it would create that kind of tension. They also talked specifically about limiting nurses' ability to talk about or to provide information. They said that was very problematic since patient education is a core nursing standard. When I was on the call with the Nursing Commission, there was a nurse in an ICU from here in the state who said that she absolutely did not feel that it was our role to talk to the patients or provide information about death with dignity, that was the physician's role. And I objected vehemently that it's a nursing responsibility to provide that kind of information. So the Commission agreed that it is a core nursing standard, and in fact they said the Department of Health explicitly says that employees cannot be sanctioned for talking to patients about medical concerns. So it's, they didn't exactly tell you what number to call, but they almost went that far in terms of saying that it's nurses' responsibility and nobody can get in trouble for doing what's in their scope of practice. The second issue they dealt with was conscientious objection. This is where this got a little murky for me. The opinion says, when a nurse finds that actively participating in aid in dying conflicts with deeply held values and judgments, it's reasonable to raise this objection in order for the nurse to maintain their own moral integrity, which is good. It's a solid statement about respecting who we are and whether we can participate or not. In such cases, the nurse should ensure another nurse can provide the care without undue burden to the patient. It says that since this objection requires a serious moral conflict, they say the only activity the nurse may request to avoid is being present when the patient's ingesting the medicine. Then, in my view, they seem to muddle things by saying, however, nurses should be sensitive to their own self-presentation and their ability to provide compassionate, non-judgmental care to a patient who's making a decision contrary to their deeply held beliefs. So they seem to say the only time you can raise conscientious objection is for the specific action of ingesting the medicine. And then they say, but if you've got a real problem with everything, you can't just act like you don't, you know. So to me, I mean, conscientious objection to any participation at all would be reasonable if a nurse really felt, I just can't, this isn't me, you know, this doesn't line up with my values. And then as long as somebody else could take on the patient and provide the care, great. So I disagree a little bit with the commission there. But they really did a great job in a lot of ways with this opinion, and I encourage you to take a look at it. So with this information, I started to wonder about how hospice nurses in the state were doing with death with dignity. I looked at the research. There was a 2018 literature review, only 10 peer-reviewed studies of American nurses on this topic, and none of them since 2012. Campbell and Black, Campbell is down at Oregon Health Sciences University, I think, and I actually talked to him about this study. They conducted a survey of Washington State hospices and published that in 2014. It was real good. It's a good article talking about kind of defining policy issues for hospices and the importance of hospices having clear policies on this, but they didn't do anything in terms of talking to the nurses about how the nurses were doing. So after consultation and receiving support from a lot of people, I undertook this study. So my purposes were to investigate factors affecting hospice nurses' attitudes and beliefs about death with dignity, the effect of participation or refusal to participate, and ways to support each other as we navigate these issues. So I did send out the invitation to the survey to all of the hospice directors who are part of Washington State Hospice and Palliative Care organizations. I asked them to forward it to their nurses. I don't know how many of them did and how many of them didn't, but Barb Hansen and I sort of got around the hospice directors anyway by emailing everybody who was on their networking contact list. So that's how some of you may become aware of the survey that was sent out. I also invited the survey participants, if they wanted to do a follow-up interview with me, to do a follow-up interview, and I had 5 conversations, kind of more lengthy conversations with people, kind of qualitative research. So these are what the results, the demographics. 43 people responded, 43 hospice nurses in the state. Median age was about 50. Median years as a nurse was about 15. As a hospice nurse, about 4, although we had a range from less than a year to 35 years in hospice. A variety of degrees, mostly BSN, but everybody else. And the religious affiliation, none came in first, with Christian and then other on there. It was a nice mix of people. Yeah. So I asked first if they understood Washington's Death with Dignity Act, and 40 out of 42 said yes. And did they support it? 37 said yes, 3 said no, and I think 3 must have just not known what they thought. Were they aware of the ANA and the Washington NQAC guidelines and statements? 34 said yes and 8 said no, so some education on there. Are you willing to provide all usual care for a patient who chooses death with dignity? 40 out of 42 said yes. Are you willing to provide information on death with dignity? 39 out of 42 said yes. To facilitate informed consent? 34 out of 42. To act as or sign the paper asking for the medication? 24 said yes and 17 said no. But one of the confusions, I think, with people was this quote kind of summarizes. I would need to clear up whether or not I could be a witness in my current job to sign on as a request for death with dignity. I'm not clear if my employer allows it. On a personal level, I would for sure be a witness or sign the papers. So you get that institutional tension kind of arising. Anybody can sign and witness somebody asking for the medication. It's just that if it was two nurses, they couldn't do it, like they couldn't be the two witnesses. There's some specifics in the law about who can be a witness and who can't. An employee of an institution can only be one out of the two and not both. That's just kind of a quick summary there. Would you be willing to be present for ingestion of the medication? 30 said yes and 12 said no. Would you be willing to be present after ingestion? 37 said yes. So there again was some ambivalence around being present for ingestion. That could have been partly because of employer restrictions. Again, it could have been something else, but I suspect it was probably more along the employer restriction line. I didn't have much verbal data on that or to back that up. The factors influencing the willingness to participate or lack of willingness, the factors that have the most influence were people's views of nursing and nursing ethics. 27 out of 42 said very much influence, and followed by personal morals and ethics. So nursing ethics and personal ethics would be the strongest factors leading people to go ahead and participate. And there's a quote here. I believe every person has the right to dictate their own care preferences. As a nurse, I respect and support their choices. Factors having the least influence were concern about what others might think. Yay, courageous nurses. Relationship with the patient. So whether I had, a strong relationship or not, I think people felt like they would act on their ethics. And religious and spiritual beliefs, again, having the least influence. And this was interesting, and a quote to kind of catch some of that. I consider myself a Christian, but as a nurse, I recognize my faith is not necessarily my patient's faith, my opinions, not my patient's reality. I will be participating in my first Death with Dignity for a patient next week. While I'm dealing with the moral dilemma of how I was raised religiously, I'm choosing to support my patient's decision because it's his choice, his body, and his right. Here's some more comments. Can you see these? Can you read these in the back? Eh? If you got 20/20 or you haven't been to the eye doctor lately, or I'll read them briefly. I don't like reading, but so a couple of other comments. After having a patient who committed suicide prior to Death with Dignity, I'm a huge supporter of the law. I feel having the ability to control what happens if their status changes gives our patients a huge sense of release and some control in a situation where they've lost control. And then the second quote, I've been present for Death with Dignity on several occasions. It's one of the better deaths I've witnessed. I would like the scope of practice to include preparation of medication, although not administration of them, as this can be hard for families to do at the same time. Just as a side note, so that some of you are familiar perhaps with Canada's law with medical assistance in dying, and Canada's law, of course, allows administration of the medication by healthcare professionals. And now Canada's law is actually extending. I don't know if you've heard about the last year of legislation or so, but Canada is now on a track that you don't have to have a terminal illness. You can just have a chronic illness that causes, I'm trying to remember the phrase.
Irremediable suffering.
Irremediable suffering. Suffering that just can't be relieved by any means. It's kind of, and they don't talk about that or define that. I've read a little bit. It's existential suffering. So with the best palliative care, or with the best hospice care. And they're also, after a year delay, they're moving it to also include mental health diagnoses. So Canada is moving on this, just so you know. They've gone way beyond what anybody in the United States is doing. Yeah, it's kind of incredible. But they're moving. They waited a year on the mental health diagnoses, and some people really raised concerns. I think the Medical Social Workers Association in Canada raised real concerns. The physicians didn't, to my knowledge. So anyway, just to let you know kind of what the larger...
Will that include dementia?
I think that it does, but the person has to, again, kind of choose into it, but, you know...
Right, but even early stage here.
Yeah. I shouldn't have probably opened that can of worms, but... because I'm not an expert, I don't even play one on TV, but... So just to let you know that Canada's moving, and has moved pretty far. Other comments from my study: our employer encourages us to support our patients' wishes related to death with dignity. We're not to directly connect patients to end-of-life Washington, but to our local health department. This is how some hospices just kind of work around it a little bit. We can't be in the room during ingestion, can enter afterwards and provide support. Second quote, I work for a Catholic organization. They dictate how we can treat our death with dignity patients. We cannot provide them information on how to contact death with dignity or be present when they consume. Frustrating to not support patients fully after they've made informed consent. Lack of employer support also limits my knowledge around this option. I wish I knew more. So I ask a question, are you aware of your hospice's policy regarding death with dignity? 39 out of 42 were, or 39 out of 41, I guess. We missed that elusive one person there. Does your hospice inform patients about all legal options, including death with dignity? 28 yes and 12 no. So there is difference among us in terms of informing about legal options. Does your hospice provide info only to those who request it? 31 said yes, 9 said no. Do you have a religious affiliation? 18 said yes, 23 said no. That's of these folks. Does your hospice's policy regarding death with dignity restrict your participation? 21 said yes, 19 said no. If so, in what ways? Can't be present when meds administered, and then a few others. Can't discuss, provide information, unable to be present after ingestion. Has your hospice's policy caused you moral distress at some time? 12 said yes, and 29 said no. If I'm legally allowed to be present to support families pursuing death with dignity, I feel I should be supported by my employer and medical director in using my expertise. Another said, you feel like your hands are tied. Not being able to tell patients about their options is hard when I see undue suffering and patients wanting to die. This was interesting. Have you cared for a patient choosing death with dignity? Of the 40 who answered this, 5 said I've cared for one person, 14 said 2 to 5, 3 said 6, 1 said many, 1 said more than 10, and 1 said over 50. Just to give you some perspective too, last year, well, the 2020 data is the most recent data I've got from the health department, the Department of Health for the state. There were 340 individuals in the state who requested death with dignity medicine in 2020. 252 of them died after taking the medicine. So that says a couple of things. First of all, the number of people that request death with dignity in Washington state every year has slowly risen over the past 11, 12 years, but it's the highest it's been is this. So 340 people out of the entire state. That's less than 1% of the deaths in Washington state. So just to put the whole thing into some perspective. And of the 340, only 252 actually took the medicine. So some nurses and end-of-life people will say, it's a comfort to have it there, to know if I want it, I can take it, kind of thing. But some people die before they take the medicine from their other causes. And part of the reason I wanted to do this talk is because I know that probably every hospice, everybody in the room has experienced this with a patient. Because it's been going on for 11, 12 years now, and even though it's not very common, sooner or later everybody's going to have somebody. If you're not caring for them directly, your colleague's going to be caring for them. So it's going to be affecting us, and we need to have an opportunity to talk about it with each other, to have policies in place that help protect us, help protect our hearts and spirits in this. If you've cared for a patient who chooses death with dignity, how did that affect your attitude towards death with dignity? 13 comments said something about it reinforced my support. I would have liked to not have been told to abandon the family and patient when they were ready to administer. There's that concern about abandonment. I was honored to be asked to be present, and I stayed until death, approximately 4 hours later. I was amazed how beautiful it was. The patient went out surrounded by the people he wanted, was supported in life and death by. Me being a representative at the hospice helped my colleagues get through the patient dying by death with dignity, as the patient had 3 young kids and 1 a newborn. It was healing for my colleagues to help answer questions surrounding the patient's death. So this is from someone who was able then to go back to their colleagues and talk about the experience. Yeah. I mean, I was edified by the talk this morning about boundaries and barriers. But, these people do get under our skin. I mean, they're dear to us as they go on. So it does affect us. More comments. After the experience, I found the need for the option. It reinforced my belief death with dignity should be available. For those who wish it, I continue to fully support, even more so having had long nursing relationships with these patients. It allowed for the patient to choose his perception of dignity, relieving distress and providing comfort. Many people choose to have the meds at home, gives them peace of mind, but they may not choose to use it. In my experience, it's been very peaceful, reinforced my support. On the Department of Health annual report, They do, I imagine it's the physician that must ask the questions to the patient, because they actually have on the report the reasons that the patient is choosing death with dignity. And the number 1 reason is they're less able to engage in activities making life enjoyable. 91% of people who request death with dignity, that's their reason. Close second is loss of autonomy. And then it's followed by loss of dignity, and of being a burden on others. Being a burden on others was selected by about 60% of the patients as a reason. Inadequate pain control or concern about it is 38%. So that's not as big of an issue, which says maybe we're doing a good job with symptom control. It's not the biggest concern. It's a concern for 1 out of 3. This second comment I want to read because it sort of is a turn in the comments. At a previous hospice employment, I cared for a patient that chose death with dignity. I had a neutral attitude toward choosing such a path. I didn't think I would ever choose such a path personally, but I felt I could totally support someone else's choosing and be present to help in comfort measures if needed. Going through it, however, was awful. The patient took the tablets, etc. His wife helped him. The process went well. But I experienced a terrible feeling that I can only describe as extreme spiritual distress. It was overwhelming and stayed with me for months. I still find it amazing that this change in me happened when I was not regretting my involvement at all going in. I think it's really important just to have this, you know, we might go into it kind of in principle. This is the right, you know, I support their right to choose kind of thing. But what it does to us, heart and soul, might be something different. And so if that happens, you know, I don't know that you should be surprised at it. I mean, nurses operate out of heart, but, you know, and principle. It's just, this is a really big thing, obviously. It's a big thing to be part of. So hopefully this person got some help, but it happens. And this final one, some of the deaths were traumatic to me, while generally peaceful for the patient. I've had lingering thoughts and replay the events in my head. PTSD, question mark. I do know that this is the best option for patients when they've chosen it, though. Yeah. I must say, you know, I really appreciated the honesty of the nurses' responses. It was extraordinary. The conversations that I had were very honest as well. And some of these comments, I think, are from my verbal conversations with the 5 who agreed to talk. And this second, I learned that it's so hard on some families. I feel like when someone is dying, there are steps the patient and family need to go through to help the grieving process. And with death with dignity, steps are skipped. I feel for the patient and support them, but I'm torn. Sometimes feel it as a selfish thing. When I have a patient interested in death with dignity, I always try to find out why, and then work on the quality of life issues so that maybe they won't want to go through with it. I've had many change their minds. I think this just brings up the whole thing of, and this echoes what I spoke with director of one of the hospices who said, when people raise the question of death with dignity, it's a perfect opportunity to talk about what's going on, right? Why would you want to choose that? What are your reasons? And can we talk through those? And maybe then we can meet some of the needs that you have. Not that maybe you won't choose death with dignity later, but yeah. So I would invite you to turn to a colleague at your table and just talk for a few minutes about this. What are your thoughts and feelings about death with dignity? If you've been involved, if you want to fess up and say that you've been involved, what's that been like? So please turn and talk at your tables for a few minutes. Okay, I think we'll come back together. Hello. We'll come back together now. Just a few more slides to share with you, and then maybe we'll have some time also for some conversation in the large group. I did ask at the end of the survey what kind of support would be helpful to you. And the biggest response was staff training on death with dignity provided by End of Life Washington. So give them a ring. Second was opportunities for open discussion with other nurses at my hospice. So I really encourage that. We need to talk about this in our hospices together. Particularly, you know, I mean, I doubt that any hospice has not had this experience at this point. Maybe not, but so to talk about it. Video or online education on the law and ethics was mentioned. I don't know if anybody does education on the law itself.
Oh, yeah, we will do.
Yeah?
Can I just make
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm Marie Eaton. I'm the community champion for the Palliative Care Institute at Western Washington University, and our mission is to do provider and community education. Our next webinar is on November 10th from 4 to 6. It's on death with dignity, particularly on the ethics. In a state where 45% of the beds are faith-based beds, how can we prepare compassionate support for patients who are requesting this, even in a faith-based institution? Greg Vanderkeef will be one of our speakers, and there are 3 other dynamite people who have a lot of experience, including Judy Kinney, who is the executive director of End of Life Washington. So she'll be talking about there's actually been a rise in requests in the last year, yeah, and about some of the challenges they face. And we'll be talking about 1608 and the impact of that law, yeah, the Patient's Right to Know law. If you want more information about it or to sign up, the Palliative Care Institute website is pci.wwu.edu, and there's an events tab, and you can click on that, and all the information's there.
Thanks, Marie. So PCI is the Palliative Care Institute at Western at our university. If you go to the DOH site, just Department of Health, Death with Dignity, they do explain the law a bit. They have a frequently asked question area where they sort of explain the law. The law isn't explained all that well anywhere that I know, but Greg? Yeah.
I'm Greg Vanderkeef, and I'm with Providence, and we did recently first adopted a system-wide policy, which is really helping to clarify a lot of misperceptions. In the early days, people were told mistakenly, or in some areas maybe they actually were correct, that we really couldn't even talk about this. And it's been opened up to where we can talk freely. We can talk about End of Life Washington. We really don't call it referring to End of Life Washington, but informing people about it as a source for the full range of options for people at the end of life. And End of Life Washington celebrates if people end up dying peacefully of natural causes. They're not all about Death with Dignity Act.
Right.
We've also developed an educational module more recently that is available, unfortunately, only within Providence right now. They were looking into trying to find contracts to allow other faith-based systems to look at it. It has to be a little bit nuanced too, because Swedish, with whom we have an affiliation, has some different regulations around what Swedish providers can and can't do. But it gets into the eligibility requirements and then also the proper responses. There's 6 vignettes in it where the first response is an understandable but less than helpful response of, well, I work for Catholic healthcare, so I can't participate. And this, truthfully, a lot of this is work that Stu Farber and I did in 2008, so Stu Farber's legacy lives on yet again. The second response is very legalistic. Again, very realistic, correct, but not very helpful. The third is a best practice response, which is to say, before I get into the details of the Death with Dignity Act, I'd like to learn more about what led you to ask me about that. Would that be okay? That opens up a very different conversation. And even that last part, and this is again from Stu, is very intentional. Asking, would that be okay, gets the request for permission, demonstrates respect and recognizes that the agency is with the patient, not the provider. So there is some work that's going on to try and help socialize this so that when people are out in the field, I think especially of frontline hospice caregivers out in the homes or people in a nursing home, those are the people who really address this. In the hospital, I get questions. Over 50% of them are not asking for it, they're asking about it. My friend told me there's this law and I want to know more about it. My favorite, which many of you have heard this story, is the old woman looks over at her daughter, I would never do it, I just want my family to know how badly I'm suffering. To which my thought was, they've suffered a lot over the years too, haven't they? So there is work of that sort going on. I wanted to add one other comment, well, two other comments. My first comment, this is great work. Thank you. I hope you get it published.
Thank you.
This is really important.
Thank you.
Secondly, similar work was done in Canada, and as you mentioned, over 90% of the cases there are actually voluntary euthanasia rather than self-administration, which to me would carry a whole different moral freight. When they surveyed people in a similar model, one of the biggest things that came out is Canadians who participated feel, number one, I didn't have adequate education. My institution I work for, the provincial government, my professional society, somebody needs to do more for education. And secondly, I don't have adequate resources to deal with the moral distress of those last couple slides you put up. We need to have resources so that people who go through the experience of those nurses who I thought I was going to be okay with this and now I'm experiencing extreme spiritual distress, where do I go with that? Right. And so we need to have places to support the caregivers who are involved. So thank you for allowing me to pontificate a little bit.
Thank you. Yes. Sure.
I just wanted to let people know that we have a virtual audience watching too, and they've chimed in a couple things. Rebecca Hudson from End of Life Washington just wanted to comment that she's here on the line and she's happy to provide training to anyone who wants it. And then also Amy Green Bradley, she says, thanks for what you do. I have been blessed to be a part of the process with my patients.
Thank you. Thank you. I would encourage hospices to look at their policy around this and to engage their staff in discussion around it. That was another thing that would be helpful for many people. And also then to end, I just wanted to let you know about some legislative action that is ongoing to address barriers to death with dignity. Currently, 86% of those requesting death with dignity live west of the Cascades, while 60% of the population lives west of the Cascades, or thereabouts. So the whole question of what happens on the other side of the mountains and access in rural areas has been a concern. In 2020, the Washington Legislature commissioned University of UW to do a study of the barriers to access. And the governor vetoed the bill because of its expense. It was an ungodly amount of money. I don't know what, UW must have just been asking for the ranch. And, right, but he vetoed it in 2020 because of the money. In 2021, the champion for this, or one of them in the legislature, is Representative Skylar Rude. He had introduced a bill in 2021 that would reduce the waiting period in between the two requests. Currently, it's 15 days. The bill would reduce it to 3 days. It would expand the providers who can assist the patient, including APRNs for the first time, because currently nurse practitioners cannot prescribe the medicine. It would prohibit employers from forbidding employees about assisting, and it would require public disclosure of institutional policies on providing death with dignity care and information. The other thing that it would do is that it would allow mail order of the medicines. So this bill is about trying to level the playing field in terms of access to death with dignity. The bill died in committee in 2021. It didn't make it out of committee, but I've emailed Representative Rude just in the last week and asked him if he's planning on doing this again, and he said yes. And in fact, the legislature in this past session reauthorized the study to UW. I think they gave them less money, but they did authorize the study. So right now, University of Washington is conducting the study to see what the barriers are to access to death with dignity. They have to report that to the governor by December 1st. And then the legislature will then be able to look at that information and look at it in light of Representative Rude's bill. So just to let you know, that's what's happening at this point in terms of legislation around death with dignity. So it's not going to open up death with dignity itself. It's just looking at access issues and extension of it. That's the intention anyway. Other thoughts, comments as we end? We've got a few more minutes. Your conversations at the table were helpful, I hope. It just helps to talk about this. It's the whole thing about kind of normalizing the conversation. Yeah. All right. Well, there's nothing wrong with ending early. And when I do that with my students, they're all really happy and they give me good evaluations. So thank you all.
If we'd known, we would have baked you a cake, but I think there's a leftover lunch or two out there if you want. Oranges, yes, because we care about your health. All right. So I want to preface this session by saying we did a similar session at the Oregon Fall Hospice and Palliative Care Conference a month ago. And I think people weren't sure what to expect. And then afterward, in the evaluation comments about the whole conference, which you will also be asked to submit, what one thing will you change? A lot of people wrote they will, change some of their practices and pay attention to certification. And anyway, it was kind of eye-opening for folks. So anyway, let's get to it. This is all that's standing between us and happy hour a little bit later, the reception. No, just kidding. No, we're not going to make it quick. So let me see here. I am looking at the wrong papers here. I grabbed the wrong introduction papers, so I will make stuff up. You could be other people. Okay. Dr. Hope Druckman. No, okay. Cheryl Medawattage is the executive director, is that your title, at EvergreenHealth. She comes to the state of Washington, where she's been for a couple years now. She was promised it never snows here, by the way, from Oklahoma and Texas, where she has many years of experience in hospice. Laurie Jackson has an MDiv degree, so don't say anything bad around Laurie, and you know how those people are. And no, she is the CEO, is that your title, of the Chaplaincy in the Tri-Cities, and they have an inpatient unit. Cheryl's facility has an inpatient unit, but Kendra Zern can beat you both because her program has 2 inpatient units from Community Home Health and Hospice. Kendra is in charge of Community Home Health and Hospice's HR department. They're going to share information during these trying times of workforce shortages. How do we keep people that we already have working for us? How do we attract new talent? How do we move forward in this challenging time? So I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl to start because she has some slides. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel, whose bios I left on the table.
Make sure I can see my slides. Okay. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having us. This is an amazing topic to talk about. I wish I had my magic wand, but I do not, as far as staffing shortages. But there are some opportunities for us in healthcare and in hospice and palliative care that we can talk about. So I know we're going to talk about impact of certification for healthcare employees, and really, I mean, it's a quality initiative. But it just made me go back to 2004 when I was in Oklahoma working for a very small hospice program, probably less than 50, average daily census of less than 50 patients. It was an RN-driven program, and we had we had an old team, a new team trying to come together, and one of the initiatives for us was to try to come up with a certification program that we would put together ourselves, or I would put together myself, to try to bridge the gap between the two programs. And I have to say, just trying to get a certification program going for that really brought the two teams together. And for the first time, we were actually able to become a unified hospice program. And it elevated our practice. It took us from a good program to, I strongly believe, a great program at the time. And we were 100% certified by the time we got done. Every clinician was certified. But we had the Gallup survey at the Sisters of Mercy Hospital that I was working at, and one thing always stood out to me. People, number one, do not leave their jobs. They leave their bosses. I'll never forget that as long as I live. They want to feel valued. They want to know they have the tools necessary to do their jobs. And money came third. Money was not the predominant factor determining why people chose places to work. People would take less money to work for somebody who they knew cared about them, and or that they knew they were making a difference. So based on that, and just remembering what I have done in the past, when I joined Evergreen, I remember talking to Dr. Katzenberger in my office, and we talked about certification at Evergreen as an opportunity. Could it be an opportunity for, one, recruitment, but also retention? Our initial goal was about 10, could we get 10 nurses to buy into this vision of continuing excellence, professional development, and growth? And Kathy thought, oh, I think so. So that's kind of started our journey. There are a lot of factors. We know the pandemic has played a huge role. We went back and looked at our data at Evergreen the last 3 years, post-pandemic, pre-pandemic, and then during the pandemic years as to why folks were leaving. And surprisingly, the number one reason was not it was not leaving for other jobs, but we had the number one reason was people were retiring. We had the majority of our staff choose to retire after the pandemic. So recognizing how hard this pandemic has been on our field clinicians, for those who are in management and leadership, some of us have been able to have that luxury of being able to work from home. Our field clinicians never had that choice. They continue to care for our patients day in and day out without hesitation. And for that, we have to be truly indebted to them. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to skip through some of these slides. You have these. I know we want to have an open discussion. So there's lots of slides here as to what's contributing to the nursing shortage. I did want to point out, too, the CNAs. I know we talked about that briefly at our board meeting yesterday. But the CNA shortage is huge in healthcare, but it's also contributing to our nurses leaving the bedside because it's added burden to the nurses in the field and in the bedside. So we have to fix that problem. So CNAs, we have a shortage of CNAs, we have a shortage of nurses, the RNs they're leaving the bedside. And surprisingly, pandemic was not the primary reason for some of them. A lot of them, staffing ratios was huge. So I think it's a challenge for all of us in hospice is to go back and think through our staffing ratios with our acuities of patients being so high. What is the right mix? But staffing was one of the number one reasons, patient safety or employee safety for people leaving bedside. We saw less than 80,000. We had less than 80,000 fewer nurses under the age of 35 in 2021. So younger nurses are not going into hospice and not going into nursing. People are just not wanting to be nurses anymore. Nursing school enrollment significantly down. We don't have enough. We had 91,000 students who were not accepted into nursing schools, primarily because of clinical placement site issues, inadequate compensation for faculty, and then, of course, budgetary constraints for nursing schools. And we see this in Washington as well, especially with our CNAs and inability to get those tests administered in a timely manner to get them out into the field. Going to skip some of these. So this is what we're talking about, CNA shortages. Again, we've got to solve it all. It's not just nursing. Social workers, I now have social workers in this room. Hard to find them, hard to keep them, and we have to do something different. Okay, so why certification? Certification, of course, it's formal recognition of specialized knowledge. It's elevating somebody's practice. It's taking somebody from a novice clinician to an expert in the field. I think most clinicians, I can speak for myself, it's critical for me to know, to be an expert at what I do and continue to strive to get and challenge myself to get better. It is a voluntary program. It reflects an individual's achievement beyond basic licensure. And currently we have over 180 nursing certifications across the country. Most of them through the ANCC, but we have a lot through the Hospice and Palliative Care organization as well. So benefits of certification to individual nurses. Nurses are recognized and respected. It's empowering. Studies have shown 90% of nurse managers would hire a certified nurse over a non-certified nurse across the board. There's monetary improvement. Nurses who are certified tend to get better compensation. 95% of certified nurses report practice change for the better. And that there's nothing more affirming than to hear clinicians go through a certification program and then call you and say, wow, we got to use what we learned in class or what we went through and through the certification program. It's impacting bedside nursing. It's impacting end-of-life care in a very positive way. And of course, there are benefits to healthcare employers as well. Employers who support certification are better poised to thrive in a very competitive market. Again, nursing certified nurses have a high level of professionalism and culture of retention, which is critical. Okay. It can impact grant funding as well as accreditation. And again, we do this because we want to make sure our patient outcomes are great or improved, and this is a testament to that. And also, we have lots of benefits to our patients and families. You're an expert at what you do. They have the trust in you. And as you know, our families are very savvy. They're very knowledgeable. A lot of people will talk to multiple hospice programs before they choose the hospice that they want to go to. So our consumer is very, very educated. But there's some barriers to certification. Time and scheduling. This is from nurses as to why they did not get certified or have not been certified. Time and scheduling, the cost of the exam. The employer did not foster an environment of continuing education, and also test-taking anxiety. I think all of us can relate to that. So we at Evergreen chose to create what were our objectives of our program. We wanted to create an environment that fostered ongoing professional development, creating a culture of ongoing learning. That was really important, not just to do it one time, but to have a culture where this has become an expectation. It is the norm for us and not an exception anymore. Our goal was, of course, to recruit and retain the most qualified clinicians, minimize our turnover, improve employee engagement and job satisfaction. And again, quality outcomes was critical. In order to do that, we, of course, got the endorsement of our higher-ups in our organization that this program brought value. The team, engaging our hospice team, how important is that to them? And we had very positive feedback about how important continuing education was. And then making sure the individual was willing to commit to the time it took to get certified. So we partnered with the HPNA, this was early last year, with the intent, again, could we get 10 nurses certified in 2022? As you know, they offer 6 certifications. I know we talked about palliative care this morning. And I have to say, when I presented this in Oregon, as great as it was, I did have a couple of folks come up to me and say, why don't you do pediatric hospice? So that really got me thinking as from an equity and diversity and inclusion standpoint. So we definitely have some challenges that we need to address as well. So what we decided to do is we would support any clinician as long as they met the criteria to be eligible for certification. We would support them in their quest to become certified. We would pay for the certification, develop and provide the training, as well as pay for the training and the time to take the test. All aspects of those barriers we wanted to take down. We started in January of 2021. Out of 118 nurses, we had 40 certified nurses on staff. It was our commitment to invest personally and professionally in their growth and development. And we engaged our team to generate what interest we had. We thought we'd probably get 10, but we had 40 nurses actually sign up for the initial certification. Because there was such a large group of clinicians, we broke it up over June and December of last year. The hospice leadership, Kathy, I know I've got a lot of folks here from our Evergreen here, but everyone really bought into the vision of we needed to make this happen for our staff. We engaged our educators, of course, all the hospice managers, myself, and of course our leadership, the senior leadership, to make sure this happened. We developed the curriculum ourselves. We did not have a HPNA endorsed curriculum. We did this on our own. I've just taken the certification too many times, I guess. Yeah. And I won't tell you what I did the last certification. Actually, I had 2 shots of tequila before I went in for my test the last time. But that was not on the clock. I just want to make sure that's on record, okay? And I did pretty okay. Anyway, yeah. So we offered classes for about 20 hours virtually. This was really helpful for the folks that wanted to take the test because it brought that, they really missed that connection. And I was able to connect with fellow nurses that really helped with the camaraderie and that family unit that they were really craving. And we taught that class every week for 20 hours total. At the end of 2021, we had 34 new certified hospice nurses on staff. Each hospice nurse received a raise of $3,100. And the approximate cost to our department was about $200,000. I know that may sound like a lot, but it's really, to recruit and retain and train 2 nurses, that doesn't even come close. So it was a really wise investment on our part. And no matter the size of your agency, I know you can do this. It's doable, and we have some wonderful information and resources coming for you. We then extended the certification to our CNAs. They're the backbone of our hospice program. We could not do what we do. I know I can't do their jobs. And of course, they don't tend to get the highest pay. 18 CNAs chose to sit for the certification, and we did the exact same thing. We did the 20 hours of training, paid for their testing, and training and then going to take the test. We ended up with 11 hospice nurses certified, hospice aides certified last year, and each aide received a 50-cent hourly raise. That was a lot for our aides, and they were very, very appreciative and very deserving. If I could give them more, I would most definitely do that. So our outcomes was we increased from 40 to 73 clinicians by the end of 2021. We had 11 certified CNAs. Our goal, we continue to retain all certified clinicians. Not one of the clinicians that got certified has left our program, and that's really important. And our turnover has been at 8% or less for the year. This was not an expected outcome, but we were actually awarded the HPN Employee of the Year for 2022 because for our efforts with continuing education and professional development and growth of our staff. But like I said, we didn't want to do this as a one-time offering. We wanted to create that culture of ongoing clinical excellence and professional development and growth. So we wanted to offer our certification training annually. So far, we have had 16 nurses. We did it one time this year with the same program. We had 16 nurses pass their certification this year. At the time I did this slide, we were preparing our master's level advanced social workers for the advanced hospice and palliative social work exam. I'm really glad to tell you all 16 of them took the test last week, and all 16 of them have their certification. And I know we have, I think Mike is in here as well, so congratulations. And the great thing about this is this board is actually going to work with the Hospice and Palliative Credentialing Center, and this exam is going to be part of the HPCC in 2023. Because up till then, all the focus has been on nursing and nursing only. And, I've always asked the question, what about our chaplains? What about our social workers? Making sure we have access to all our clinicians, all our field as well as our hospice disciplines, making sure they have access to ongoing training. So I just want to end real quickly, but of course with an Aristotle quote, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit. And I can tell you, as leaders, or for the leaders that are in here, it's incumbent upon us to invest in our staff. They're our most valuable and limited resource, clearly. It is, at the end of the day, they want to feel valued, they want to feel respected, that they have their tools necessary to do their jobs, to elevate their practice. And I think no matter what size hospice you are, you can do this. It is proven to show that staff will stay. It is proven that it makes a difference, that they know that we care about them. So, thank you.
Okay. I found the right paper, so I want to give them their due. So Laurie Jackson is a graduate of Whitworth University, Princeton Theological Seminary, and Columbia University in New York, and she is currently completing her doctorate of ministry at Knox Theological Seminary. She has led hospice, home health, and palliative care in Yakima Bend and now chaplaincy. She has worked on the surprise question and 5 wishes, which have become passion projects for her, and she has published 1 book, Little White Lies and the 7 Deadly Sins, under the name of Laurel Jackson. And her second, a work of fiction, is in the works. Well, who knew? You can present on that next year, maybe. And Cheryl has been with the American Nursing Credentialing Council, and she serves on the expert panel in the development of the pain management certification exam since 2012. Let me see. And Kendra, I love this about Kendra. So she completed her bachelor's degree at George Fox University in Healthcare Administration, earned her PHR certification. What does that stand for?
That would be the
Professional Human Resources.
Professional Human Resources certification. She has started and sold a new business, then purchased another while working full-time in and around healthcare companies. Wow, what do you do in your spare time? She says her work in healthcare has brought her both the greatest growth and the greatest challenges over the past 3 years. Kendra, I'm going to turn it over to you now to share some of the strategies you've tried at Community Home Health and Hospice. And what we're hoping at some point here in a few minutes is that folks, not everybody works at EvergreenHealth, I think, that you will share some of the things that you have tried to attract new employees, retain your current employees, and we can share some ideas and strategies. So take it away, Kendra, and hopefully that mic works.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. So I wanted to stop just for a second because this is going to be a little bit of group participation. First off, we heard about why get your certification and why that's so important. I'm going to give you a few hints on how, and that's going to be a little later in my talk. And so I only get about 5 to 15 minutes, maybe, I don't know. A few minutes. But before I do, I want to ask you, in the last 2 years, how many of you asked yourself, is this thing I'm doing really worth it? I mean, how many times have you sat back and said, gosh, I'm so challenged. This is so hard. Have anybody? Yeah. It's okay to, because we've all been very challenged in the last couple of years. We've been challenged with staffing. We've been challenged with difficult CMS regulations. We've been challenged with audits. And so if you haven't asked yourself that, I'm glad you're in a happy place. If you have, you're like me, and likely some of your staff members as well. They've been asking themselves, gosh, is this thing that I'm doing really worth it? And am I still making an impact? Is the job that I'm doing still making an impact in the world? And I think that as nurses, as clinicians, as administrators, we all want to make an impact. That's why we're in hospice. And so if you've been asking yourself that question, how do you then re-engage? So your staff are asking that question for themselves. How do you re-engage them? And I'm going to challenge you, because if you are not spending time with your staff members, just 15 minutes of uninterrupted time, asking them a question, what can I do to support you today? Or what can I do to support you this month? Are you still excited about the work? Do you still really enjoy every day when you get to go and work with your patients? Because that's what drives us, is our patient care. And then in the last month, what was the most impactful experience you had with a family that you can share with me? Because when you start to learn about their passion, you start to learn about those interactions, you can design a vision and motivation around that. And typically, I've learned that you can't motivate somebody. A picture, though, a vision can motivate somebody. If you paint that picture, they're going to drive towards that. And again, going towards the CHPNA, so take, for instance, people who are motivated, they want, of course, who doesn't want more letters behind their name? Everybody loves that. RN, BSN, MSN, CHPN, I want all of those things. So if you give them that opportunity, you will reinvigorate them. Because I don't know too many nurses that come out of school and go, sure, I'll do hospice. Typically, you find people want to do hospice because they had a good experience, or they knew somebody who was in it, or they had a family member who did hospice. It's a driven area. It's very, very few people that I know of that said, sure, I'll give it a try. And so place an achievement in front of them and help them get there. But how many of you are nonprofits and say, I don't know if I can afford $200,000 worth of as an investment? I mean, I know we're struggling. It's hard to come up with that kind of money to say, I want to invest in my people, but you have to. You have to put that out there. And so how do you do that? And the first thing I will say is, how many of you are administrators or clinician managers? Are clinical managers out there? Okay. Are you talking to your HR professionals about WorkSource and the Workforce Opportunity Tax Credit? Does anybody know about that in the room? It's called WOTC, Workforce Opportunity Tax Credit. So WorkSource in the state of Washington provides what's called Workforce Opportunity Tax Credit and OJT. That's on-the-job training. Every single person that comes to you, whether they qualify or not, should be asked, would you like to engage with this Workforce Opportunity Tax Credit, or OJT, to see if you qualify? Because there are buckets of money out there through ResCare, through the state, that they need to give away. And this is one area that they will give it away to, is this OJT program. And so with the OJT program, over the last couple of years, I've been able to secure almost $20,000 for education. It's awesome. And this is something that your HR professionals should know about and should be driving to bring that money into the organization. It's undesignated. So if you're a nonprofit, you know you have to designate certain funds and income, totally undesignated, which means you can put it into education. And so once again, I want to go back to ask your staff, are you interested in your CHPN? Are you interested in the CHPNA program? Interested in the MSW program that's now available? That one came available when? That's new?
It is new. It started this year and actually will be part of the HPNA and HPCC in 2023.
Yeah, so very exciting that that's finally coming around. I think there's an LPN certification as well. So yeah, something to look into and provide. So since the Salem conversation, we have now engaged at least 10 of our CNAs in getting them going on their CHPNA program. They are so excited and they're so ready to do this. And your organizations can do the same thing. It doesn't take a lot. The certification is $250. Mm-hmm. It's very, very affordable in order to get them there. It takes 3 months of training, self-study, provide an opportunity for them to mentor each other on that, and then pay for the test. It's worth it, and you will have that engaged workforce. Pretty amazing stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to ask you is, how many of you use gamification in your organization? No? Does anybody know what gamification is? No. Okay, so a little bit of new information here. Gamification, think of it like brownie points. So your brownies or Boy Scouts, you get the patch, right? The patch. How many patches you want? I've got all my badges and everything. Same thing that you can do in your organization is give people a patch. And it may seem a little bit kooky and a little bit juvenile, but people like it. And how that works is give them the opportunity to cross-train into the field, cross-train into the IPUs, cross-train into different areas, so that they're giving themselves the opportunity to be more flexible and learn a new skill. And with that, if you've got individuals that are dedicated, you can also drive your annual reviews around that, saying, okay, you've got these different certification opportunities, you're at just starting, okay, you're an expert level, you're proficient, or you're superior. And use that in order to drive your performance reviews on a regular basis. So those are just a couple different ideas on how to drive engagement and retain those very, very important staff members that you have. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristen. Laurie, sorry, Laurie. I knew I was going to get that one. Oh, yeah, you want to.
I'll just sit
wait,
on it.
wait, here. So there you go.
You're good. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Thank you both. How interesting. I love that we're coming at this from different angles. I was at the Oregon conference as well. I did not sit on the panel. I got to listen and consider some of the challenges that I know our organization our agency has been dealing with, especially the last couple of years. So 2 buckets, obviously. One is getting staff. The other is keeping them, right? I'm going to be more of the Sesame Street sharer here and just have very simple information, and I want your help in finding out what has worked and what has not. Why don't I start with some what has not? Has anybody had a challenge with getting staff? Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Yeah, have you lost staff and then had a hard time getting more? CNAs, yes. CNAs, other staff? Right. Or just CNAs? Just CNAs. For you, just CNAs?
CNAs and nurses.
Nurses?
Yeah, MSWs, chaplains.
MSWs. Physical therapy, good. Keep calling them out. Say again? Occupational therapist, good. So probably everyone on some level, some of you have struggled. So so have we. And what we at Chaplaincy have found that is that when we have started to expect more, we've gotten more. which has been an interesting little twist. And we've been frantic, and the pandemic has, I don't even need to finish that sentence. So we've had lots and lots of challenges at different times. I would say last fall was really challenging for many of us, losing a lot of staff or retaining staff. And so I started at Chaplaincy just 8 months ago and came from Oregon prior to that. And I jumped into an agency that had come up with some ideas for first retention, and then also trying to get folks, and great ideas. But there was a philosophy that I didn't know about, but I've glommed onto since, and it was from our HR director, who said very eloquently, more eloquently than I will probably say right now, if we give something, we can never take it away. Once you give something, you can't pull it back and expect your staff to feel satisfied. People are typically going to participate in a job because of one or more of three elements: their satisfaction, the pay, and the location. So the pandemic changed the location thing for several of us, but like you said, Cheryl, that it didn't for our patient-facing staff. They still had to go out into the field, right? Go out into the homes and all. But the pay became very wonky for many, that we have been unable to, several of us have been unable to pay to the level that we want, especially when we've been losing so many staff. Maybe it's through attrition, maybe it's through lack of satisfaction. But as you had said, and I'm so glad I got to follow the two of you, thanks. You both said really well, if people are satisfied, it's not always about the money. So how do we help with the satisfaction? We tried something that was poor, and like I said, we're starting with isn't great. It's such a great idea, but it didn't work out well. And that was, we thought, hey, since our nurses have some opportunity to provide more direct patient care, we were not providing as much as we wanted to in our productivity, how about we incentivize them by paying more per hour for direct patient care? And so they can get up to a level that we were hoping would be a really good level. And that had such a nice ring to it. Until it didn't work, because all of a sudden we were then valuing nursing over the other disciplines, right? Plus, we got moving along and realized this is so much work. And we were having our nurses, and then we added the social workers and the chaplains, because that's what we do. And we realized they were having to work so much extra to document their time. Now I'm having direct patient care. Now I'm doing not direct patient care. And then we also were devaluing the non-direct patient care that was also a requirement, right? So it was full of messes. And the reason that I'm telling you this is not to knock our team, because they were phenomenal. And but so that you know, that was not a great choice. You're welcome to share your not great choices too. What we ended up doing to solve this, because of what has become now a really solid philosophy, don't give something that you then are going to take away, was we leveled everybody higher. And it was an investment that has been very well worth it, because we ended up having 2 of our 120, 130 whatever employees, 2 of them who were providing direct patient care, only 2 of them were actually meeting the threshold that we had set for direct patient care anyway. And so it turned out everybody got a raise, because we just divvied it out so that nobody was going to lose anything. So it ended up being a patient or an employee satisfaction element that we were not planning on. Yay us. And it was an investment, like I said, that was really well worth it. Have you had things that have not worked? Have you tried things to retain or bring on employees that maybe hasn't worked great?
Well, I think,
if you don't mind, because we have some folks playing the virtual game. If you'll come to the mic, that would be great. Thank you so much.
One of the things that I find is that people don't want to work as much, but they want to get paid more. So our company is kind of like stringent on the 5-day a week. And when we're interviewing people, people don't want to work 5 days a week anymore. They want to work the 3 12s or 4 10s. So our hospice or home health agency, we're combined, is kind of stringent because the upper management wants, you know, everybody will want part-time or the 4 10s, and so we'll lose out 1 day or 3 days, or, you know, depending on how they alternate staff. So that's what our biggest issue is.
Okay. That is a really good point. And that's a challenge when, especially leaders are often working Monday through Friday, right? And yet, last I heard, hospice, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And so that adds to the challenge. Thank you for being willing to share that. I appreciate it. Other challenges you've had?
Can I share?
I'd love it.
Okay. So one of the biggest issues that we have, and it would be because of the level setting, internal equity problems. Okay. How many of you have internal equity issues where you're paying some people too much and some people not enough, and you're having to play around? So we had an issue, and it worked in many people's favors, not in others, where everybody got a 20% raise. 20%. In RNs, yeah, the RNs, because we needed our RNs, we needed them to stay. We were trying to find a way to have retention. The biggest problem that happened was many of them were on a performance-based reward system prior to, and so they fixed all of the performance-based rewards, put them into their hourly wage, and then turned around and gave them all an increase. So now we have people who have really high wages outside of the wage band, people who are not quite there because they didn't have PRP or the performance-based rewards. So, did not work.
Thank you for being vulnerable, for sharing that. Part of the reason for talking about some of the things that haven't worked is just I want you to know that we're all in this together. That it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to have things that don't work. It's also okay to say, I'm sorry that didn't work, let's fix this. Because there are opportunities to fix it. One of the things that we have done has not only been in the money part, but in that satisfaction, and this has turned out to be beneficial on lots of levels, and that's been to make sure that everybody's working at their highest level of their licensure. We say regularly, how do we say this? We would not let our social workers place a catheter. Right? Do you? Right? Yeah, I mean, that's kind of obvious, right? Although I as a former hospice chaplain, have been often asked to replace a catheter when I have walked into a patient room because they didn't know who I was at first until I introduced myself. In the same way, we want to make sure that our nurses are not doing social work. And our chaplains aren't doing the work of the volunteers, but everybody's working at their highest level, which has actually allowed us to be able to see more patients. Most of you are working in territories, but sometimes those territories can get fuzzy. And so for some of our agencies, shoring that up a little bit. Making sure we had a big loss of many social workers in a 1 month time period earlier this year, and the leaders kind of lost their brains. I mean, me and the others, and our director of spiritual and community care is back here, William. Yeah, he was loving me for a while. Because our social workers had a caseload of as many as 60 patients. Oh. I mean, it was crazy. So that gave us opportunity, though, when we stepped back for just a hot minute and said, okay, how can we turn this into an opportunity? How can we be creative? And that's when we started thinking about students. And thinking about bachelor's level social workers, and then providing them, like you had suggested, the training, How do we then get them the supervision? At first, the master's level social workers were saying, well, now wait a minute, that's going to add to my load. Well, only for a moment, because as you are helping to get them to that higher level, they'll stay. And I've had good experience in the past with getting students on and helping them stay. So that created a new pool for us of social work. Talking with your friends is if you like where you're working, you'll share it. If you don't like where you're working and your friends always only hear the, wah, wah, Charlie Brown's parents of this, I didn't enjoy this, they're never going to want to come work with you. But if you like where you're working, then things change. So we've focused a lot on engagement of late. We've done a lot of investing in this conference, sending more people than we've sent in the past, than we brought in the past. Having the things that really aren't very expensive, but they pay off. More events for the staff. We're only 130-ish employees, but we serve 2 counties. How do we make sure, and we have a 10-bed hospice house, how do we make sure that people are really engaged and that they are appreciated? And having those small things, celebrating the birthdays, taking stuff to them, to all of the different sites regularly, has really paid off substantially. Like you said, 200,000 sounds like a lot, and it is for those of us that are smaller agencies. There are, along with that, some of these small things that we can do. What are the things that you've been able to do to help engage your current employees? Maybe it's been, I know for us, we've done stuff like spot bonuses, like we've never done before. A small investment so that we wouldn't topple the scale. And instead, we'd like to give you a $1,000 spot bonus retroactively for the work you've already done, not the, we want to give you 3 more jobs and so we'll pay you a $1,000 spot bonus. Congratulations, you. But thank you so much for jumping in. We expect everyone to jump in, but you went above and beyond. And so we're going to give you a one-time spot bonus. That has served us really well. People appreciate it. What's worked for you? Have there been things that have worked for you so far that you can share with the rest of the teams?
They provide chocolate for us.
Chocolate is not expensive and it's really beneficial. You can call it medicine at times too.
Sign-on bonuses.
Sign-on bonuses. Would you, if you don't mind, I'd love to hear more about how you've done it for sign-on bonuses. Have you been able to? How do you help? You have sign-on bonuses for the new employees. How does that relate to the current employees?
There's also a referral. A referral bonus. So if you're a current employee and you refer someone outside the agency, then you get, I think it's like $6,000. So at their 90-day, you get the first $3,000, and then after 1 year, you get the second $3,000.
That's great,
right? So it's a lot of money.
It is, and you're making sure people stay.
Exactly, right,
it's
and that
like
they're a good
week.
fit.
That's really good. Thank you.
Yep.
Is that helpful? Is that?
I think it is.
You think it is? That's good.
So when you do those sign-on, you do sign-on bonuses as well? And so how long do they need to stay for the sign-on bonus? Because I think you were talking about the referral that they...
Yeah. I am not totally sure, and I think it's changed, right? So I asked on someone's behalf like 6 months ago, and I think they were giving them out pretty quickly, and then decided they needed to kind of hold back a little bit and make sure. So it's probably a 90-day thing, and maybe it's also a year for that second half of it. But I think that one's also $6,000, which feels like a lot. But I think makes a big impact, and it does help with retention.
Fabulous.
Can I ask a question about, for those of you who have offered sign-on bonuses, do your current staff resent it when the new kid, the new kid gets the sign-on bonus, and your current staff's like, well, I'm here working away. Where's my spot bonus?
That was the reason I was asking too. And
So, yeah.
I liked the referral.
I think there is a reason. I think it can build resentment.
Yeah.
I think just like when we're really short on a weekend and I get the approval to provide bonuses for someone picking up a shift, then the people that are already working are like, well, great.
What about me?
What about me? So it's tricky.
I have a related question too, and Jody, I won't pick on you necessarily, but if it applies. How many of you have union contracts for your nurses? Do you feel like that has helped you or hindered your ability to, say, be creative with bonuses or extra shift, or are you sort of locked into extra shift differentials or some of those?
Are you willing to say out loud?
She knows this is being recorded. No, I'm just kidding.
Not from a management perspective, but from a staff perspective. I actually applied at Evergreen and Kaiser at the same time. Union rates and all of that, both are union. Evergreen had a higher pay scale, and Kaiser tried to negotiate with the union to get a higher rate, and they weren't able to do that.
Yeah.
There were other factors that led into, because they do offer less days a week, and that's I ended up choosing that job, but the union did interfere with that. Since
I candidly, I've worked with unions, and I think sometimes they can tie your hands a little bit in terms of your freedom to negotiate. And something you said led me to ask, how many of you do offer flexible schedules for the employee who wants to work 4 10s or 3 12s, and they agree to maintain the productivity or whatever? Because I think as an industry, healthcare needs to look at that more than maybe we ever have before. Or maybe somebody wants to work 30 hours a week, but they want to work 6 hours 5 days a week because it works best in their life with their kids or whatever. Could we use them for that 6 hours? Is it better to hold that position vacant and not fill it? I mean, I think we have to embrace some changes and be creative. Please, share.
I was going to say that's another thing that the union contracts really interfered with. At my previous job, I was in management, and we didn't have a union contract, and we were able to work with people who went to school or changed the schedules, and that really helped our retention. It had a huge impact of being able to be flexible, like very quickly too. Oh, this thing happened. I'm willing to come in for 4 hours. I'm willing to do 2 hours. I'm willing to work like 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. and fill in. And we did a lot of that. And the younger generation expects it.
Exactly.
And they see it in all of the tech companies, and lots of their friends are in that. And if we can't find a way to do more of that, we are not going to retain any nurses.
I agree,
and we're
totally.
Gonna, hemorrhage.
I'm from the baby boomer generation, and we had this attitude, no, you got to work 5 days a week and 8 hours a day, and the younger generation.
And PTO. PTO is a huge thing, and that ended up being part of my deciding factor is more days of PTO matters.
Yes, absolutely.
And that was a large reason that a lot of the people stayed, because where I worked before, every person that started there got 6 weeks of PTO a year to start.
Yeah.
Wow.
Cool.
The housekeeper to the executive director.
Yeah.
Before a year of experience.
Really
and
important.
Things like that.
Have people been able to use PTO bonuses in lieu of, extra pay? Have you been?
Will you go to the microphone? Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. We did go through a period, end of 21, early 22, where we were losing staff hand over fist. And we recently had kind of a major overhaul in our leadership, and one of the things that we have really brought on is flexibility. And the ability to say, I don't know, but we're going to look at how we can make that work, especially when we're interviewing. Right. What works for you, will it work for our agency? And what we're finding is more often than not, yes, it is. We can do a 5-day-a-week schedule. We can do 4 10s. We can do what we need to do. We've offered monetary incentives. Everybody got a raise. We actually bumped our CNAs way up in hopes of getting more, which has not worked at all. You know, it doesn't matter the amount of money we offer them. They're not wanting to come. But we have offered the flexibility. Our leadership built in 3 mental health days. Just over and above your PTO, no questions asked. If you're struggling today, call and say, I need a day. I need 4 hours. I need this. And it has been huge. What we've learned is that talking to our staff and listening to them about what you need. We all went through such trauma through COVID. Everybody is exhausted. We realized life is more important than work, and so we've got to find a way to nurture our staff. And what we found is by really listening to them, offering them those days, saying, I see that you're struggling. Do you need the day tomorrow? Do you need to sleep in? Do you need to take a little time? And we're getting really good quality care for our patients. Our patients are thriving, our families are thriving, our staff is thriving. We've had people come to us and say, we want to work here. That's
great. That's it.
Amazing. Amazing.
And look,
we're
three additional PTO days, mental health days.
Yes.
Your COP scores are better because you don't have disgruntled people
We just went
working.
through a deficiency-free survey.
Yeah.
We have had, I mean, it's amazing what happens when you put into your staff. Money matters, but life matters more.
Yeah.
And really listening to them is what we've learned, is what's paid off.
This is a takeaway for everybody. Add 3 mental health days to your.
It's a lot.
We also added two more national holidays, and could not believe the satisfaction that added, as well as 3 words. Let's pilot this.
Yeah.
Because we had also been you got to work the 5/8s, or in the hospice house 3/12s. You have to, and then we've paid a lot for on call. And so when people came in and said, "Wait a minute, I want to work 4 10s, and I got Susie Cream Cheese over here that wants to work 3 10s," and wait a minute, that's 7 days.
Exactly.
And,
it works.
For that same, it was fantastic, and people were willing when we said, let's just try it out.
Yeah, and job shares. That used to be a dirty word, job share, but maybe that's a solution for a lot of people who don't want to work full time, but they're willing to commit to a schedule.
Yeah. When we said no, we had several people, I need 4 days a week. No, they're gone.
Yeah, that's
They
right,
left.
because they'll go find somewhere that will be flexible.
Yeah.
I have something out. I'll let you sit down. I have another question for you all, and it came up at our Oregon conference. And at our Oregon conference, we were talking a little bit about psilocybin because it's going to be legal in Oregon in 2023. And by the way, your patients are going to go down to Oregon and be able to access it because they don't need a prescription. So anyway, that's a topic for another day. But we were talking about many programs have pre-employment testing in place. And I said, will you have it for psilocybin because it's going to be legal? And some were, and then I said, do you have it for cannabis? And many do. And I said, and I'm not a cannabis user, but I said, but why? Recreational use is legal. And the attorney who was talking about psilocybin said, I heard earlier that you're having employment challenges and problems finding staff. So my question to you would be, why do you have this pre-employment testing for cannabis as a barrier? You're automatically excluding a lot of people who would be perfectly good employees and use it in their off hours because it's legal. And I bet you don't test for alcohol, in your pre-employment screening. So I just invite you to look at that. And does anybody want to share? And maybe we should hear from our HR person about, should people eliminate that? And what's your opinion?
I think my opinion on that is that until we get past the federal, that if you are somebody who accepts CMS, you accept funds, that you have to test for it and it has to be part of your panel. So that's my understanding, is that that's why we have that.
But people can't test for it on the job site unless you seem impaired. So, you know, again, I don't know.
Yeah,
all
I think it's the
outs, but-
pre-employment piece of it is
Yeah.
that's the toughest thing. Although
Yeah.
I will say, here's one tip, is when your HR people are interviewing and you say, do you need to study for this test? And they say, oh, maybe, then you give them 30 days.
There's a tip, yeah. Anyway, I'd love to hear if anybody else have any ideas or strategies you've tried, not about cannabis testing, but just about, you know, attracting people.
A lot of our people are 0.8 FTEs, so they work 32 hours a week. I think a 5-day a week, 8-hour day in this work out in the field is too much.
Exhausting.
Also,
yes.
how are you handling nights and weekends?
On call. So we
And
have
is it
we have
separate group, same group?
separate group. So we have a triage service based out of like Ohio-ish that initially takes our calls and triages them, then contacts our nurse that's on, who's at home, if there is a visit needed.
I guess what I'm asking is, that nurse that's home, is she a daytime week nurse? Completely separate?
Completely separate.
Ours are too, and I found that's been really beneficial.
That is an investment that is worth its weight in gold to have a separate on-call cadre.
Totally.
So your daytime nurses are not also taking turns taking call.
I also have a dream to get our RN case managers off of a weekend rotation.
Yes.
Completely off. Right
Yes.
now they're once every 6 weeks, but it totally destroys
Yes.
patient continuity
That's right.
the week before and the week after. And I think we should staff that differently.
So
I think they would be way happier.
Like I didn't come up with this. I walked into it, and at first I said, I can't believe you're doing this. And now I'm all, I can't believe we're doing this. So we pay nurses full time, and they do the night and weekends.
We do too.
And they're exempt employees.
You can also find nurses, and I'll tell a story of myself. I used to think you'd never find nurses who would just work weekends. There's lots of them.
They're starting to.
And they can be part-time, or you can formulate it into a full-time job. There are lots of them. They want to be home during the week with their kids. They're going to school, whatever it is. There are lots of them. And yeah, stop having your regular staff nurses have to take turns on weekends. That is a huge retention idea. I mean, it works. Yeah. Anybody, any other ideas? Or in a perfect world, what would you create? Your king or queen for a day. Anybody have any ideas for employment? Or something we haven't talked about? Kendra.
No, I'm going to say this, and it might upset some people in the room, okay? But
including your panel?
I think everybody. Just like housing prices, I'd like the expectation for the RN wages to come down to a more appropriate level. So, I know that because they have just driven so high that our reimbursements aren't going up. How are we affording our nurses?
You mean because of the pandemic?
Because of the
pricing?
pandemic, yeah. I mean, there's a high demand, low supply.
Well, you gave everybody a 20% raise, right?
I did not do that. I did not do that. There's a lot to say about that, but I mean, in a perfect world, I mean, we went from having a reasonable range to smaller places trying to compete with hospitals and hospital wages and hazard pay and all of these things, and yet again reimbursements didn't go up. So now we're working with this very, very small margin, and it's a struggle. It's a challenge.
Did anybody feel grumbling? Are you coming up? Great. I just want to ask about the 50 cent an hour CNA certification raise. I mean, it's $1,000 a year. It's not peanuts. But when you compare it to $3,000, were they satisfied with that, or did anybody else feel like that wasn't enough of a certification?
I think for the group that took it, and they were very satisfied with it. Should they have got a lot more? Definitely. But again, those are part of those union contracts that we have to negotiate.
Yeah.
But they seem very grateful.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Just for the brainstorming part of that, I personally one of the reasons that drove me to the company I work for now is they give you $750 a year to go to stuff like this, and I really love that.
I'm
and
sorry,
you should
to go
all do
where?
that.
$750 a year to go where?
To conferences.
A conference. Oh, like an annual conference allowance, and you can
Correct.
choose the conference. And,
Yes.
And includes paid days off while you're here.
And hotel.
Wow, that's great. That's
I
a
don't
great
think it includes
idea.
flights, but it does include hotel.
Okay, so if you wanted to fly to attend a conference back east, you might have to pay for the flight, but your hotel could come out of that $750.
I would like to add to that perfect world, which goes along somewhat with what you said. I'd really like to see, and again, this may not. How many nurses are in the room? Awesome, love what you do. I would really like to see there be more equity with the whole team.
Yeah.
The nurses,
Yes.
social workers, chaplains, knowing that the other disciplines also have to have such a high level of education and training. So I mean that as no disrespect to nurses. I think you know that bringing the others up, or whichever way, bringing the others to a level of equity, since we are an interdisciplinary team that all works together, and it is crucial that we have everyone working together at their highest level. That would be really important to me in that perfect world. Thank you for providing it.
If I had a nickel for every time I heard a social worker say, we have to have a master's degree to do what we do, I could pay to go to a conference. So anyway, Meg, and then Red Sweater, you had a comment again? Pink's red sweater, and yeah, no.
It's $3,000, and then $750 of that I think is for the hotel.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, $3,000.
But anyway, it's really
$3,000. That's great.
We should all do that. That's a good
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. All right, Meg, we have a virtual attendee question.
Yes, well, not a question, but some more comments when we were sharing.
Or
about
the
what
king or
everyone's
queen for a
doing.
day.
Yeah, Amy at Eden Hospice of Whatcom County has 2 salaried 7-day on, 7-day off to cover NOC and weekend shifts.
Yes.
And she also added that our daytime nurses are much happier not having to cover those shifts.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you,
yes. Absolutely. Thank you. Hey. And there are people, I hired some at my former program. We had the same model, 7-day on, 7-day off. And they loved it, of course, because they hardly ever used their PTO because they were off every other week, you know. But the other perk they got was they didn't have to work any of the holidays during the year. The regular nurses did have a lottery, and they had to each work 1 holiday a year. You tell any nurse they only have to work 1 holiday a year, and they don't have to take call, and they don't have to work weekends, they will take that. Absolutely. So, yeah, and there are nurses who are willing to do 7 days on and 7 days off. So, and we gave them vitamins so that they would never call in sick. Any other questions or ideas? Any other parting thoughts from our panel? This has been a great exchange of ideas. I know you're all going to go back and make changes or put notes in the suggestion box. And everybody's going to start a certification program if you don't already do that. That's awesome. Thank you all for your attention. And at 5 o'clock, there's a reception upstairs with free food.
All right. And bid on the auction items.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. And thank our panelists.